Hello, Midnight Wanderers, and welcome to Netheric Horror. This is where ancient whispers rise beneath a crimson sky, carrying you softly into the world of dreams and shadows. Before tonight's haunting story begins, tell me, what corner of the world are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. And if the silence of the night calls to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you'll never miss the moon's next dark secret. When I was 18 years old, quite a few decades ago at this point, my buddy and I decided to skip school for the day and head out to explore the city of Chicago together. It was one of those spontaneous, carefree decisions teenagers make, the kind where you convince yourself that missing a day of classes is worth the adventure waiting for you outside those school doors. We ended up getting thoroughly baked while driving around the city, cruising from place to place with no real plan in mind, just enjoying the freedom of an unstructured day. We spent a good chunk of that time popping into various head shops and record stores scattered around the city, having a genuinely great time just browsing, talking, and soaking in the atmosphere of being young and carefree in a big city. Toward the end of the day, as the sun was starting to make its way lower in the sky, we happened to drive past a small house that had a strange, unusual sign hanging above its front door. Given the kind of day we were having, bouncing between head shops and record stores, we assumed this new place was simply another one of those same kinds of shops, maybe something a little more obscure or off the beaten path compared to the more obvious storefronts we had already visited. Curious and still riding the wave of our aimless little adventure, we decided to pull over and check it out, fully expecting to find another quirky little shop filled with the same kinds of items we had been browsing all day. Walking up to the entrance, the front door setup was a bit unusual, consisting of two separate layers, a noisy screen door on the outside and a heavier, solid wooden door behind it. As we pushed through both of these doors to step inside, they made an incredibly loud, echoing racket, the kind of noise that seemed to announce our arrival to anyone who might have been present inside the building. Once we were through the entrance, we found ourselves facing a staircase that led up to what we assumed was the second floor of the building. And based on the general layout, we figured that whatever shop existed inside this place must be located upstairs. Without much hesitation, we started climbing that staircase, still expecting to find shelves of merchandise similar to everything else we had already seen that day. When we reached the top of the stairs, what came into view stopped us completely in our tracks, freezing both of us in place almost instantly. Spread across the floor of the room in front of us was a massive pentagram, painted or marked out in a way that left no ambiguity about what it represented. At the far end of that same room stood an altar, arranged with candles, along with several statues depicting demonic or occult imagery. Essentially the full collection of items you would associate with some kind of satanic or occult worship space. To make the scene even more disturbing, there appeared to be dark red splatters across various parts of the altar and surrounding area, staining the surfaces in a way that closely resembled blood, whether real or some kind of prop material meant to imitate it. The entire place felt completely deserted in that moment, with no other people visible anywhere in the room or anywhere else that we could see from our position at the top of the stairs. The silence in that space was almost overwhelming, the kind of quiet where you genuinely feel like you could hear a single pin drop onto the floor if one happened to fall. My buddy and I exchanged a quick, wide-eyed look between each other, both of us clearly thinking the exact same thing without needing to say a single word out loud. Whatever this place actually was, it was not a shop we wanted to be browsing through any longer, and our instinct told us immediately that we needed to leave. We turned around, ready to head straight back down the stairs and out of that building as quickly as possible. But the moment we turned, We found ourselves face to face with something that made the fear we had already been feeling spike dramatically. Standing behind us, directly on the staircase between us and the exit, was a massive figure, easily around 7 feet tall, dressed in a hooded monk's robe. The hood was pulled up and fully covering the figure's head, leaving absolutely no visible face underneath, just an empty, shadowed space where a face should have been. Its hands were clasped together and tucked into the long sleeves of the robe, completely hidden from view, adding even more to the unsettling, faceless, almost inhuman quality of the entire figure. Neither my buddy nor I had heard this figure approach us at any point, and its sudden, silent presence directly on the staircase, blocking our only obvious path down and out of the building, sent an overwhelming wave of panic through both of us simultaneously. We completely freaked out in that instant, our fear overriding any kind of rational thought process. Without stopping to think it through or consider any alternative, we literally jumped down the stairs, moving past this massive, silent figure, however we could manage, desperate to put distance between ourselves and whatever we had just encountered. We crashed through both the wooden door and the screen door on our way out, not bothering to be gentle or careful about it in our rush to escape, and sprinted straight to where our car was parked. We got in as fast as physically possible and sped away from that house immediately, both of us completely shaken by what had just happened. As we drove away, trying to process everything, we both independently recalled the exact same troubling detail. Neither of us had heard the front doors open behind us at any point after we ourselves had walked through them, and neither of us had heard any footsteps or any other indication that someone else had entered the building after we did. Which raised an unavoidable, deeply unsettling question that neither of us had any real answer for. How exactly had that figure appeared behind us on those stairs, blocking our path down, without either of us hearing any sign of it entering the building or making its way up to that second floor? Still reeling from everything that had just happened, we sped away down the street in a complete state of panic, our minds racing and our attention nowhere near where it needed to be for safe driving. In our distracted, adrenaline-fueled state, we blew straight through a stop sign without even registering it was there, and as a direct result, we ended up broadsiding, or T-boning, another car that had been legally crossing through the intersection in front of us. The impact was significant enough that, combined with our already fearful state of mind from what had just happened at that house, we were both immediately convinced that we were in serious trouble, certain that this accident was going to result in us getting arrested, especially given how baked we both still were at the time. As we sat there, bracing ourselves for what felt like an inevitable disaster unfolding on top of everything else that had already happened that day, the driver's door of the car we had just hit swung open, and out stepped a guy who, in our already altered and frazzled state, genuinely looked like some kind of depiction of Jesus, long hair and all. As it turned out, this guy was just as high as we were in that moment. All three of us stood there for a few seconds, just staring at each other, taking in the strange absurdity of the entire situation. Then he broke the silence, suggesting in a fairly calm and practical tone given the circumstances that we should probably get out of there before any police showed up at the scene. Given the day we had already had, none of us needed much convincing. We all agreed almost instantly, and without any further discussion. We went our separate ways, each of us driving off from that intersection as quickly as we reasonably could without drawing any additional attention to ourselves. That night, after everything that had already happened throughout that entire chaotic day, I went to my regular custodial job, the same job I worked most evenings during that period of my life. While I was there going about my usual tasks, I turned on the 6 o'clock news, mostly just as background noise while I worked. As I was watching, a segment came on featuring a reporter standing on some street corner, giving a live report about the specific neighborhood he happened to be standing in. While this reporter was in the middle of delivering his report directly to the camera, something happened in the background of the shot that caught my full attention immediately. My buddy's car, the same car we had been driving earlier that day, went speeding directly through the background of that same shot. And then, right there on live television, our accident from earlier that day played out again, visible in the distance behind the reporter, captured completely by accident on the news camera. I remember sitting there, staring at the television screen in complete disbelief, watching this moment from earlier in the day replay itself right there on the evening news. Completely unplanned and completely unexpected, from the perspective of anyone watching who had not actually been involved in it themselves. The reporter himself seemed to notice the accident happening behind him in that same moment. Based on a brief acknowledgement he gave, some kind of quick reaction to the noise or movement occurring behind his position. But instead of stopping his segment to address it directly or investigate further, he simply continued on with whatever report he had originally been delivering, treating the entire incident as nothing more than a minor background distraction rather than something worth pausing for. Watching that unfold on live television, knowing exactly what had actually happened just hours earlier, knowing everything that had led up to that specific moment captured on camera, was an incredibly surreal experience. One that added yet another strange, almost unbelievable layer onto an already deeply strange day. In the end, nothing further ever came of the entire situation. No police ever tracked either of us down in connection with the accident. No consequences from that entire chaotic sequence of events ever caught up with either me or my buddy in any official capacity. It was almost as though the entire day, from stumbling into that strange occult worship space to encountering that silent, faceless, impossibly tall figure on the stairs, to crashing our car afterward, to seeing that same crash play out unexpectedly on the evening news, simply existed in its own strange little bubble, with no lasting real-world repercussions following any of it. Despite the complete lack of any lasting consequences, that entire day left a permanent mark on both of our memories, becoming one of those stories my buddy and I still bring up and talk about even now, all these decades later. There is something about the specific combination of events that day, all stacked on top of each other in such rapid succession, that makes it stand out so vividly in both of our minds compared to countless other memories from that same general period of our lives. Most of that particular day had started out as such an ordinary, light-hearted teenage adventure. Skipping school, driving around, popping into random shops. Nothing that suggested anything unusual or frightening was waiting for us later that same afternoon. Looking back on it now, I still find myself turning that entire sequence of events over in my mind periodically, trying to make sense of certain specific details that never quite added up cleanly. The fact that neither of us heard the front doors open again after we had already gone inside, yet somehow found ourselves face to face with an enormous, silent, completely faceless figure standing directly behind us on those stairs remains the single most unsettling and unexplainable part of the entire experience for me. I have turned every possible rational explanation over in my head over the years, wondering if perhaps someone had simply entered so quietly that we genuinely failed to notice, distracted as we were by the shocking scene in front of us on that second floor. But given how loud and unmistakable that front door setup had been when the two of us walked through it earlier, producing such a distinct and noisy racket, it feels difficult to believe that another person, especially one of that unusual height, could have entered through that exact same door completely undetected. I also think, from time to time, about what that space actually was, whether it had been some kind of legitimate, if unsettling, place of worship for a specific belief system, or whether it was something else entirely, staged or otherwise, that we simply happened to stumble into at exactly the wrong, or perhaps exactly the right, moment. Whatever the true explanation is, my buddy and I never went back to that particular street to find out, and to this day, whenever the topic of strange, unexplainable experiences comes up between us, that specific day in Chicago, decades ago now, remains the story we both return to first. Still just as vivid and unsettling in the retelling as it was when we lived through it ourselves. This is not even close to the most frightening or traumatic thing that has ever happened to me, but it is one of the easiest stories to explain. It happened only about a month ago, and I still think about it more often than I expected. I work in retail, and most of my shifts are spent on the sales floor. Anyone who has worked in a large store knows how repetitive the job can become. You straighten products, answer questions, help people find things, clean up messes, and try to stay aware of everything happening around you. Most customers blend together after a while. Some are polite. Some are impatient. Some walk through the store like no one else exists. You become used to people acting strangely, being rude, or moving with more aggression than the situation requires. On the day this happened, I was working in one of the areas closest to the store entrance. From where I stood, I could see part of the main walkway that led from the front doors toward the back of the building. The store was busy enough that I had plenty to do, but there was nothing unusual about the shift. Customers moved through the aisles. Shopping carts rattled across the floor. Employees spoke over the walkie-talkies about ordinary problems. Then a man entered my area. I noticed him because of the way he moved. He had a completely cold expression on his face. He looked like someone who had never smiled in his life. There was no curiosity in his eyes, no sign that he was looking for a product, and no normal hesitation as he moved through the store. He walked quickly and aggressively. He came so close to me that he nearly knocked me over on his way toward the back. I had to move out of his path. He did not apologize. He did not look at me. He continued forward as though I were furniture. My first thought was not that he was dangerous. I simply thought he was a rude asshole. Retail workers deal with people like that all the time. Some customers become angry before anyone has even spoken to them. Some move through the store like the employees are invisible. I watched him for another second, then returned to my work. I did not think he was stealing. I did not think he was armed. I did not think I would see him again. About 10 minutes later, a voice suddenly came through the walkie-talkies. The message was loud, urgent, and very different from the normal conversations we heard throughout the day. Someone said that a man had stolen an expensive item and was running toward the front of the store. I looked up immediately. Because I was standing close to the walkway leading to the exit, I had a clear view toward the back. A man was running toward me. It was the same person who had almost walked into me earlier. For a second, I could not believe how quickly the situation had changed. Only a few minutes earlier, he had been another rude customer moving through my department. Now he was fleeing with stolen property while employees and security tried to stop him. He was not especially fast. He ran heavily and awkwardly, and he did not seem to realize that I was directly beside the path he was using. He was coming close enough that I could have reached out and touched him. That is when I felt the impulse to stop him. I did not have time to think through every possible result. The thought appeared almost automatically. Trip him, push him, knock him down. He was about to pass within arm's reach. His attention was focused on the doors ahead, not on me. It would have been easy. I pictured placing my foot in front of him or using both hands to shove him sideways. Because he was running, even a small interruption might have sent him crashing to the floor. The impulse was powerful. I think many people would have felt the same thing in that moment. There was a man running away after stealing something. I was directly in his path. Security was coming. It seemed as though I had a chance to help. There was also a strange feeling of responsibility. I worked there. The item belonged to the store. The man was escaping. For 1 or 2 seconds, it felt as if I should do something. I started moving. My body reacted before my mind had fully decided. I shifted my weight and began reaching toward him. Then one thought entered my head. What if he has a weapon? That thought stopped me. It came at the last possible second. I pulled my hands back and moved out of his way. The man ran past me. He was so close that I felt the movement of air as he passed. I could hear his breathing and the heavy sound of his shoes striking the floor. Then the security guards reached him. They tackled him near the front of the store. Everything happened very quickly. One moment, he was running. The next, several bodies hit the ground. There was shouting. People nearby screamed and moved away. At first, I thought the guards had caught him successfully. Then, I saw the knife. The man had already been holding it. I had not noticed it while he was running toward me. Maybe it had been low beside his body. Maybe his arm or clothing had hidden it from my angle. But it was out and ready. He began stabbing the security guards. The scene became chaotic. The guards tried to control his arms while protecting themselves. The man fought with complete desperation. He stabbed them in the chest and arms. I stood only a short distance away and watched it happen. I remember how different the attack looked from violence in movies. There was nothing clean or dramatic about it. It was fast, confused, and ugly. The people involved were tangled together on the floor. There were sudden movements, shouting, and people trying to understand where the knife was. At one point, I could not tell who had been injured. Employees were yelling for someone to call emergency services. Customers backed away. Some people froze and stared. Others began recording. I could not move. My body felt locked in place. I knew I should step farther away, but for several seconds, all I could do was watch. Eventually, the man was controlled. The knife was taken away. The guards were bleeding. One had wounds to the chest and arms. The other had also been stabbed while helping restrain him. Emergency responders arrived. The store changed from an ordinary workplace into a crime scene. Police officers moved through the area. Paramedics treated the injured guards. Employees were asked what they had seen. Customers were directed away. The stolen item no longer mattered. The only important question was whether the guards would survive. Thankfully, both of them did. Their injuries were serious, but neither man died. When I learned that they would live, I felt enormous relief. But the relief did not remove the other thought in my mind. I had almost touched the attacker. I had nearly stepped directly into his path. If I had followed the first impulse in my head, I would have tried to trip or push a man who already had a knife in his hand. He might have stabbed me before I even understood what was happening. That realization became stronger after the immediate chaos ended. At first, there were too many people, questions, and sounds for me to process anything clearly. Later, when the store became quieter and I had time to think, I replayed the moment. I remembered his body coming toward me. I remembered starting to move. I remembered stopping myself. The difference between those actions was probably less than a second. If the thought about a weapon had entered my mind slightly later, I might have been lying on the floor beside the security guards. I am not trained to handle violent people. I am not especially strong. I do not wear protective equipment. The security guards were larger than me and used to dealing with difficult situations, and he still managed to stab both of them. What would he have done to me? If I had tripped him, he may have fallen and immediately turned the knife toward me. If I had pushed him, he could have grabbed my arm. If I had managed to knock him down, I probably would have been standing closest when he began swinging the blade. The security guards were trying to stop him as part of their jobs. I would have been an unprepared retail worker who suddenly became his first target. I do not think he would have hesitated. He was already willing to stab two people to escape after stealing an item. There is no reason to believe he would have treated me differently. For the rest of that day, I felt strangely disconnected. People asked whether I was okay. I said yes, because I had not been physically hurt. That seemed like the correct answer. The guards were the ones who had been stabbed. They were the ones taken for medical care. Compared to them, I had escaped without a scratch. But my hands shook. I struggled to focus on simple tasks. Every time the front doors opened, I looked up. Whenever someone moved quickly through the store, my body became tense. I kept seeing the knife in my mind. More than that, I kept seeing the moment before I knew it was there. That was the part that disturbed me most. I had looked directly at the man while he was running toward me, and I still did not see the weapon. I thought I understood the situation. I thought I had a chance to help. I was making a decision based on information I did not actually have. The knife changed everything, but it had been present the entire time. I only learned about it after he passed me. That made me question how often people mistake danger for something manageable. From a distance, the man looked like a slow shoplifter. Up close, he was an armed person ready to use violence. There was no warning sign clear enough for me to notice. He did not shout that he had a weapon. He did not wave the knife in the air. He simply ran with it, hidden enough that I almost placed myself within reach. After the incident, some people told me I had done the right thing by not getting involved. They said merchandise was not worth risking my life. They said employees should never try to physically stop a shoplifter. I knew they were right. Those rules exist for exactly this reason. A person stealing something may panic. They may be intoxicated. They may carry a knife or gun. You cannot know what they are willing to do. But understanding that did not stop me from feeling embarrassed by how shaken I was. Part of me believed I had no right to be traumatized. I was not the one who got stabbed. I did not go to the hospital. I did not have wounds that needed treatment. I was only a witness. And the thing that frightened me most had not actually happened. I had not tripped him. I had not been attacked. I had stopped myself. So why did the memory keep affecting me? I felt pathetic for being so disturbed by an injury that happened to someone else. I compared my experience to the guard's suffering and decided mine was too small to matter. But fear does not work like that. My body understood how close I had been. The danger was real, even though I avoided it. The image of the man running toward me became connected to the knowledge of what he was holding. Whenever I replayed the scene, I imagined the version where I did not stop. In that version, I reach out. My hand catches his shoulder. He turns. The knife comes up. Sometimes I imagine being stabbed in the arm, sometimes the chest, sometimes the neck. I imagine falling before anyone can help. I imagine my coworkers seeing it happen. I imagine the guards still having to fight him after I am already injured. Those images are not memories, but they feel connected to the real event because they were so close to becoming possible. The thought does not require a dramatic change. It only requires me to continue the movement I had already started. That is why the experience stayed with me. It showed me how thin the line can be between an ordinary day and permanent injury. I did not make a careful plan that saved my life. I had one thought at the right time. What if he has a weapon? That was all. I think about how easily I could have ignored it. I might have believed I was being cowardly. I might have thought there was no time to hesitate. I might have wanted to prove that I could help. If pride had been stronger than caution for 1 second, the outcome could have been very different. Afterward, I began paying more attention to the way my workplace handled theft. There were policies telling employees not to chase suspects or make physical contact. Before, those rules sometimes seemed overly cautious. It could feel frustrating to watch someone steal and walk away. Employees would complain that nothing was being done. Some would talk about how easy it would be to block a person or grab the item. Now I understood why the rules were strict. The company could replace stolen merchandise. It could not undo a stabbing. The guards were trained, and even they were injured. An ordinary employee had no business trying to become a hero. That sounds obvious now. In the moment, it did not feel obvious. Instinct can be dangerous. The urge to stop someone may feel brave or responsible, but courage without information can become stupidity very quickly. I was lucky my mind interrupted my body before I acted. I also began thinking about the first time the man passed through my area. He had nearly run into me while walking toward the back. His expression had been cold and aggressive. At the time, I dismissed him as rude. Now I wondered whether he was already carrying the knife. Maybe he had brought it into the store intending to use it if anyone tried to stop him. Maybe he was preparing himself mentally while he walked past me. Perhaps his face looked so empty because he had already decided how far he was willing to go. I had been close to him before the theft, and I had no idea. That thought made me uncomfortable around certain customers for a while. A person would walk quickly through my department, and I would notice their hands. Someone would wear a large coat, and I would wonder what was hidden inside. If a customer became angry, I found myself watching the distance between us. I did not want to become paranoid. But the incident changed the way I understood the sales floor. It was not automatically safe because it was bright, public, and filled with cameras. Violence could happen in the middle of the store with dozens of witnesses. The knife did not become less dangerous because fluorescent lights were overhead and families were shopping nearby. For a few days, I had trouble sleeping. When I closed my eyes, I saw the guards on the ground. I heard the shouting over the walkie-talkies. I saw the man pass me. Then, I imagined reaching out. Sometimes I woke up with my heart racing. I would remind myself that I had not been hurt. I was home. The man had been arrested. The guards were alive. Still, my body reacted as though the event might happen again. At work, I avoided standing too close to the main walkway when I could. I did not want to be directly in anyone's path. I knew that was not always possible, but I became more careful about where I positioned myself. I also decided that if another person ever ran past after stealing something, I would move away immediately. There would be no debate. There would be no impulse to help security. I would protect myself and warn others. That may sound cowardly to some people. I no longer care. I watched 2 strong men get stabbed over store merchandise. Nothing in that building was worth another person being injured. The event also made me more understanding of witnesses who feel affected even when they were not physically attacked. Before, I might have thought the person closest to the injuries had the only real trauma. Now I know that seeing violence and realizing you narrowly avoided it can stay with you. I was not stabbed, but I watched the knife enter the situation only seconds after it had passed within reach of me. My brain keeps returning to that distance. A few feet, less than a second, one unfinished movement. That is enough to create fear. I still feel guilty about focusing on myself when the guards suffered the actual wounds. I know their recovery was more difficult. I know they experienced pain and probably carry their own memories of the attack. But acknowledging my fear does not reduce what happened to them. Both things can be true. They were badly injured. I was deeply shaken by witnessing it and by understanding what almost happened to me. There is no competition over who deserves to feel affected. Sometimes people survive an event physically and still need time to understand it mentally. I think that is what happened to me. For the first few days, I tried to make the story small. A shoplifter ran past. Security caught him. He had a knife. The guards survived. That version sounds simple. But inside those facts was the moment where I almost made myself part of the attack. That part does not feel small. I still remember the man's expression from when he first entered my area. I remember the urgency in the walkie-talkie message. I remember seeing him running. I remember how slow he seemed and how easy it looked to stop him. I remember starting to reach out. Then the warning entered my mind. What if he has a weapon? I moved back. He passed me. Seconds later, he proved that the fear was justified. Every time I think about it, I am grateful that I listened to that thought. I also feel sick, knowing how easily I could have ignored it. I do not know whether the man even noticed me as he ran by. He may never know that I almost tried to stop him. To him, I was probably only another employee standing near the exit. But I know how close I came to becoming the first person he attacked. I know that the knife was already in his hand. I know that if I had grabbed him, his attention would have turned toward me. And I know I would not have had the strength of training to protect myself. So yes, the experience shook me. Maybe someone else would have recovered more quickly. Maybe another person would tell the story like an exciting incident and laugh about how close it was. I cannot do that yet. I watched 2 people get stabbed. I saw blood on the floor of the place where I work. And I learned that the man who almost ran into me had been holding a weapon I could not see. The thing I remember most is not the tackle or the screaming. It is the split second before all of that. It is the moment when stopping him seemed easy. It is the movement I began and did not finish. Sometimes the decision that saves you does not feel heroic. Sometimes it feels like doing nothing. I stepped back. I let him run past. At the time, part of me worried that I was failing to help. Seconds later, I understood that stepping back may have been the smartest thing I had ever done. This happened very late one night during my freshman year of college. My best friend and I had been at a Halloween party, and we were heading back to our dorm. It was one of the first big college parties we had attended. We were still new enough to campus that almost everything felt exciting. Dorm life, late nights, crowded parties, and walking around campus after midnight were all part of the experience we had imagined before arriving. Because it was Halloween, the entire night felt slightly unreal. People were walking around in costumes. Some had fake blood covering their clothes. Others wore masks, torn shirts, strange makeup, or plastic weapons. You could see something frightening and immediately assume it was part of someone's costume. That made it difficult to tell what was real. The party had gone on for hours. By the time my friend and I left, we were tired and ready to return to our room. The campus had become much quieter than it was earlier in the evening. Groups of students still moved between buildings, but there were fewer people around. Music could be heard from distant parties, and every so often, someone shouted or laughed somewhere across the campus. Our dorm building looked calm when we entered. The lobby lights were bright, and nothing seemed unusual. There may have been 1 or 2 people near the entrance, but I do not remember anyone paying attention to us. My friend and I walked toward the elevators. We were probably talking about the party, the costumes we had seen, and the people we had met. Neither of us felt frightened. We had walked back safely. We were inside our own dorm. Our room was only an elevator ride away. When the elevator arrived, the doors opened and we stepped inside. I reached for the button to our floor. The doors began to close. At the last possible moment, a man stepped into the elevator with us. The doors opened again just enough to let him enter. I do not remember exactly what he was wearing. Because it was Halloween, there was nothing unusual about seeing someone in strange clothes or looking messy. At first, I assumed he was another student returning from a party. He stood slightly away from us as the elevator doors closed. Then the elevator started moving. Almost immediately, I felt uncomfortable. The man was not speaking. He did not look directly at us. Instead, he kept glancing at us from the corner of his eye. They were quick looks, the kind someone gives when they want to watch without making it obvious. Every time I turned slightly toward him, he looked away. My friend noticed it too. We did not say anything, but we exchanged the kind of look-close friends use when both people understand the same thing. Something about him was strange. The elevator suddenly felt much smaller. There were only 3 of us inside, and we did not know who he was. Freshman dorm buildings are usually controlled in some way. Residents need identification cards or keys to enter, and guests are often supposed to be signed in. Because he had entered at the last second, we assumed he belonged there or had come in with another group. Still, neither of us recognized him. That did not necessarily mean anything. Hundreds of students could live in one building, and freshmen do not know everyone. But his behavior made us alert. He kept his head lowered. His shoulders were tense. He looked at the floor, then glanced toward us again. I wondered if he was drunk. Maybe he had taken something. Maybe he was simply socially awkward. Because we had just left a Halloween party. I also thought he might be trying to act creepy as part of a joke. People did strange things on Halloween. They stood silently in hallways, jumped out at strangers, and tried to make their costumes feel realistic. Perhaps he was waiting for us to notice something. The elevator continued upward. It was not a long ride, but the silence made it feel longer. I watched the floor numbers change above the doors. I remember wanting the elevator to reach our floor quickly. The man continued looking at us from the side. He never smiled. He did not speak. I began thinking about what we would do if he stepped off on the same floor. Would he follow us down the hallway? Should we walk toward someone else's room instead of our own? Should we stay inside the elevator and press another button? These thoughts appeared in my mind, even though he had not directly threatened us. Sometimes the body notices danger before the mind has enough information to explain it. The elevator slowed. The number for our floor appeared. The doors were about to open. That was when the man finally raised his head and looked directly at us. My friend and I both saw his neck. There was a cut across it. It was bleeding. Until that moment, the injury had been hidden by the position of his head. When he looked down, his chin and clothing covered part of it. When he lifted his face, the wound opened more clearly. Blood began running down his neck. Some of it dropped onto the elevator floor. For a second, neither my friend nor I moved. The man did not react as though he were in pain. He did not hold his hand against the wound. He did not ask for help. He did not seem frightened. He simply looked at us. That was almost more disturbing than the blood itself. A person with a real injury like that should have been panicking, crying, or trying to stop the bleeding. This man behaved as though nothing was wrong. The elevator doors opened on our floor. My friend and I stepped out immediately. I do not remember whether the man followed us or remained inside. My attention was focused entirely on reaching our dorm room. We moved quickly down the hallway. Neither of us wanted to run because we did not want to show how frightened we were, but our walking became much faster. I expected to hear footsteps behind us. I kept looking toward the reflective surfaces and doorways, trying to see whether he was following. We reached our room and went inside. The door closed behind us. We locked it. Only then did we begin talking about what we had seen. What was wrong with his neck? Was that real? Why wasn't he doing anything about it? The blood had looked real. It had moved naturally and fallen onto the floor. Still, it was Halloween. Fake injuries were everywhere. Students used makeup that could create deep-looking wounds. Some costumes included tubes that pumped fake blood from hidden containers. We tried to convince ourselves that was what we had seen. Maybe the man had created a realistic costume. Maybe he had been pretending to act strange because he wanted to scare people in the elevator. Maybe he was filming reactions for a joke. The idea was easier to accept than believing we had been trapped inside a small elevator with a seriously injured stranger. We laughed nervously. We said it was probably nothing. Halloween made everything look worse. We began changing out of our costumes or putting our things away. The room felt safe, and the strange encounter slowly became a story we could tell later. After about 20 minutes, we became hungry. The party had gone late, and we wanted something to eat before going to sleep. We decided to go downstairs. By then, we had mostly convinced ourselves the man had been wearing special effects makeup. We unlocked the door and returned to the hallway. The corridor was quiet. There was no sign of him. We walked toward the elevator, but the memory of the blood made me hesitate. Part of me did not want to enter the same elevator again. Still, we pressed the button. When the doors opened, I looked at the floor. I do not remember whether the blood was still there. It may have been another elevator, or someone may have already cleaned it. My friend and I stepped inside and rode down. As the doors opened into the lobby, we immediately realized something serious had happened. The entire area was filled with police officers. Patrol cars were outside. Uniformed officers moved through the lobby and spoke with students. People stood near the walls watching. The calm building we had entered less than half an hour earlier had become an active police scene. My friend and I stopped. We looked at each other. The same thought entered both our minds. The man in the elevator. We approached someone or listened to the conversations around us, trying to understand what had happened. We never received a complete explanation. From what we learned, the injured man did not live in the dorm. He had apparently followed other people into the building. That meant he had entered without proper access. He may have waited for a group of students to open the secured door and slipped inside behind them. Once in the building, he had entered the elevator with us. The cut on his neck had been real. The blood was not part of a Halloween costume. That realization made my stomach drop. We had been standing only a few feet from a wounded stranger in a locked metal box. We did not know whether the injury had been caused by someone else or whether he had done it to himself. We did not know if he was running from an attacker. We did not know if he was hiding from the police. We did not know whether he had attacked someone before entering the building. We did not know if he had a weapon. All we knew was that he should not have been inside our dorm. The police were trying to locate him or understand where he had gone. The details being passed between students were confused. One person said he was running from someone. Another said police had already been searching for him. Someone else claimed there had been a fight nearby. We could not tell which information was true. Campus rumors spread quickly, especially during a frightening event. By the time a story reaches the fifth or sixth person, it may be completely different from what really happened. My friend and I told someone that we had been in the elevator with him. We described his behavior. We explained that he had entered at the last moment, kept glancing at us, and lifted his head when the doors opened. We told him about the blood. An officer may have asked which floor we left on and whether the man stepped out with us. The problem was that fear had made some details unclear. The moment we saw the injury, our only thought had been getting away. We had not carefully watched which buttons he pressed. We had not memorized his clothing. We did not know whether he remained in the elevator or left on another floor. We had not even been sure the wound was real. I began feeling guilty. What if we should have reported him immediately? What if he was badly injured and needed medical attention? What if he entered another student's room? What if he hurt someone during the 20 minutes we spent upstairs telling ourselves it was a costume? At the same time, I understood why we had not reacted differently. It was Halloween. We were young. We had been drinking. We did not know what we were seeing. The man did not ask for help. He behaved calmly enough that our brains chose the explanation that felt safest. It is a costume. It is a prank. It is fake blood. That belief allowed us to step out of the elevator without panicking. Later, after learning the truth, the memory changed. Before, I remembered a creepy man with a convincing Halloween injury. Afterward, I remembered an unknown trespasser with a real wound. Every detail became darker. The way he entered at the last second no longer felt accidental. Had he been waiting outside the elevator for someone to use it? Was he trying to avoid being seen in the lobby? Did he choose us because we were two young women who looked unlikely to challenge him? The way he glanced at us became more threatening. Was he checking whether we recognized him? Was he trying to decide if we would call the police? Was he watching our hands to see if we reached for a phone? Was he studying which floor we selected? Then there was the moment he looked up. Why did he do that exactly as the elevator reached our floor? Did he want us to see the injury? Was he trying to frighten us? Did he need help but could not bring himself to ask? Maybe he was weak from blood loss and unable to think clearly. Perhaps he had lowered his head to slow the bleeding or hide his identity. I still do not know. The fact that he seemed physically okay was confusing. The wound looked serious, yet he was standing without support. He was breathing normally. He did not collapse. The blood was visible, but perhaps the cut was less deep than it appeared. Neck injuries can bleed heavily even when they are not immediately fatal. At the time, however, none of us knew how severe it was. The police never gave us the complete story. Maybe they did not know it themselves that night. Perhaps the man was taken into custody or transported to a hospital. Maybe he escaped the building before officers arrived. I do not remember hearing about an arrest or an injured student afterward. Nothing appeared that gave us a clear ending. That uncertainty is the reason I still think about him. If I knew he had been attacked and was running for help, the story would have one meaning. He would have been a wounded person behaving strangely because he was frightened or in shock. If he had injured someone else and was hiding from police, the encounter would mean something completely different. We might have shared an elevator with a violent criminal. If the wound was self-inflicted, then we had been alone with someone experiencing a serious crisis. Any of those explanations would make sense. But we never learned which one was true. For the rest of that night, my friend and I did not feel safe in the dorm. The building was supposed to require identification for entry, yet a stranger had followed students through the door. He had moved through the lobby and reached the elevators without anyone stopping him. He could have stepped onto any floor. He could have entered a hallway and tried doors. The idea that the dorm was secure no longer felt completely true. We returned to our room and checked the lock several times. Every sound in the hallway made us look toward the door. Students walking past sounded like someone stopping outside. The elevator bell could be heard from a distance, and each time it rang, I imagined the man stepping out onto our floor. Even after police searched the building, the fear remained. The following days were strange. Halloween decorations were still hanging around campus. Fake skeletons, blood-covered masks, and plastic knives appeared in windows and hallways. Before the encounter, they looked funny. Afterward, they reminded me of the elevator. I realized how easily a real emergency could disappear among costumes. A person could walk through a Halloween crowd covered in blood, and no one might react. People would laugh. They would admire the makeup. They would assume everything was part of the celebration. That may have been how the man reached our building without receiving immediate help or attention. Maybe he understood that too. If he was trying to hide, Halloween was the perfect night. No one questioned strange clothing or injuries. Masks were normal. People acted unpredictably. Students were drunk. Someone could appear frightening and still be ignored. I also thought about how little space there had been between us. Elevators are uncomfortable places even under normal conditions. You enter a small metal room with strangers and trust that everyone will behave. There is nowhere to move if something goes wrong. The doors remain closed until the elevator reaches another floor. That night, when the man stepped inside, we lost the option to walk away. If he had pulled out a weapon, we would have had almost no room to escape. If he had collapsed, we would have been trapped beside him until the elevator stopped. If someone had been chasing him and forced the doors open, we would have been in the middle of whatever was happening. None of those things occurred. He only stood there and looked at us. But once I knew the blood was real, the possibilities became difficult to ignore. My friend and I talked about it many times afterward. Our memories were similar, but not identical. She remembered certain parts of his face that I had forgotten. I remembered the way he looked sideways more clearly. We both remembered the blood falling when he lifted his head. That image remained exact. For years, whenever I entered an elevator late at night, I became more aware of people stepping inside at the last moment. I watched their hands. I noticed whether they pressed the floor button. I avoided standing in the back corner where someone could block the door. The reaction may have been unnecessary, but it came from that night. I had learned that a person can appear ordinary until one movement reveals something completely different. The man's head had been lowered when he entered. If he had never raised it, we might not have noticed the injury at all. We would have returned to our room and heard about an unknown man in the building later. Maybe we would not have realized he was the same person. Instead, he looked directly at us. For 1 second, we saw the wound clearly. Then the doors opened. Sometimes I wonder whether he remembered us. He may have been in shock and unaware of where he was. He might not have remembered the elevator ride at all. To him, we may have been only two frightened faces in a long, confused night. To us, he became an unanswered question. We still do not know why he followed people into the dorm. We do not know where he went after the elevator. We do not know who cut his neck. We do not know whether the police were searching for him because he was a victim, a suspect, or both. All we know is that the wound was real. The blood on the floor was real. And the man was not supposed to be inside the building. I sometimes think about how differently we might have reacted if it had not been Halloween. On an ordinary night, we would have seen blood and immediately understood that something was wrong. We might have pressed the emergency button. We could have called campus police from the elevator. We might have asked if he needed help. But Halloween trained us to doubt our own eyes. Fake blood was normal. A frightening stranger was part of the atmosphere. The holiday gave him a kind of invisibility. Reality blended into the costumes. Even now, the story does not feel complete. There was no explanation in the newspaper that I saw. No officer later contacted us with an update. No one told us whether the man survived or what he had done. The police eventually left, and the dorm returned to normal. The lobby emptied. Students went back to their rooms. By the next day, People were discussing parties, costumes, and hangovers again. But for my friend and me, the night had changed. We had gone from laughing at a Halloween party to standing in an elevator beside a bleeding stranger who had entered our secured dorm without permission. Only 20 minutes later, we discovered that the scene we had dismissed as a prank was real. That is the part I still return to. We saw the truth and immediately explained it away because the real answer felt impossible. Sometimes danger looks exactly like a costume. Sometimes a person who appears to be playing a role is not pretending at all. And sometimes the elevator doors open before you ever learn whether the stranger beside you needed help, was hiding from someone, or was the person everyone else needed to fear. Compared with many of the stories people tell about frightening experiences, this one may not sound especially dramatic. No one was injured, the person never managed to get inside, and the whole thing ended without the police finding a weapon or uncovering some terrible plan. Still, for a few minutes that night, I believed I might hear my father being killed only a few rooms away from me. That feeling has never completely left. It happened a couple of days before my 22nd birthday. My family and my boyfriend were having a small get-together at my parents' house. It was not a huge party. It was only the people closest to me spending time together before my birthday. We had food, talked, and enjoyed the evening. Everything felt normal and comfortable. My boyfriend was supposed to stay with me, but he had to leave for a school function. I understood that it was something he needed to attend, but I was still annoyed. It was close to my birthday, we were already together with my family, and I wanted him to remain there. I knew it was not completely fair to be angry with him, but emotions are not always reasonable. He left for the event, and I stayed with my family. After the gathering ended, everyone began cleaning up and preparing for bed. I had to work early the next morning, so I could not stay awake waiting for my boyfriend to return. I went to my room, changed, and got into bed. I was still slightly irritated with him. The house slowly became quiet. My parents went to their room, the lights were switched off, and the familiar nighttime sounds began. I tried to sleep. At some point, my boyfriend returned from the school function. He came into the bedroom and started apologizing. He knew I had been upset about him leaving, and he wanted to explain himself. I stopped him before he could continue for long. I was tired, and I did not want to have a serious conversation in the middle of the night. Whatever argument we had could wait until the next day. Before he got into bed, I reminded him to lock the door. I do not know why I specifically remembered it that night. Locking the door was normal, but it was easy for someone coming home late to forget. Since everyone else was already asleep, he may have been the last person to enter the house. I told him to make sure the door was secure. He did. I heard him go back and lock it. Then he returned to the bedroom, got into bed beside me, and we fell asleep. That simple reminder became extremely important a few hours later. I do not know exactly what time I woke up. It was still dark outside, and the house should have been silent. Instead, I heard voices in the hallway. At first, I was confused. I was still half asleep, and it took a moment for my mind to understand that the voices belonged to my parents. They were whispering to each other. But they were whispering so loudly and urgently that it was almost like quiet shouting. Something was wrong. Then I heard banging from the back of the house. Someone was hitting the back door. The noise was heavy and repeated. This was not a person knocking politely because they needed help. Whoever was outside was trying to force the door open. I became completely awake. I stayed still in bed and listened. My boyfriend did not move. Somehow, he had slept through the voices and the banging. My parents continued speaking in the hallway. I could not understand every word, but I heard fear and urgency in their voices. Then, my father moved. I heard him running toward the back of the house. A second later, he began shouting, "This isn't your house, fucker." His voice was loud, angry, and forceful. He was confronting whoever was outside. The banging continued. My heart began pounding. Until that moment, the noise had been frightening, but unclear. Part of me could still hope that there was a harmless explanation. Maybe a neighbor had the wrong address. Maybe someone needed emergency help. Maybe an animal had knocked something over near the door. My father's words removed all those comforting possibilities. There was a stranger trying to enter our house, and my father was standing between that stranger and the rest of us. My boyfriend was still asleep beside me. I suddenly became afraid that he would wake up confused and call out loudly. If the person outside heard more voices, especially a young man's voice, the situation might become worse. I placed my hand over my boyfriend's mouth. Then I shook him awake. His eyes opened suddenly. He began to react, but I held my hand over his mouth and whispered for him to stay quiet. I told him someone was trying to break into the house. I told him my father was handling it. The phrase sounded strange even as I said it. My father was handling it. What did that mean? He was not a police officer standing behind a protected barrier. He was a man inside his own home, yelling through a back door at a stranger who was trying to force his way inside. We did not know whether the person had a weapon. We did not know if he was alone. We did not know why he had chosen our house. My boyfriend became alert immediately. We both remained in bed, listening. Neither of us wanted to move toward the hallway and create more confusion. The bedroom door suddenly felt very thin. I looked around the dark room and thought about what we would do if the back door broke open. Could we lock the bedroom? Was there anything nearby that could be used as a weapon? Could we escape through the window? Should we call the police? Maybe my mother already had. My thoughts moved quickly, but I could not choose one action. Mostly, I listened. The banging from the back of the house sounded violent. The stranger was not gently testing the handle. He was hitting the door with enough force that I wondered whether the frame would hold. Each impact made me tense. I imagined the lock breaking. I imagined the door flying open. I imagined my father standing on the other side when it happened. That was when the worst thought entered my mind. What if the man had a gun? I pictured the door opening and a gunshot following immediately. I pictured my father falling in the hallway. I imagined my mother screaming. I knew that if a shot was fired, there might be nothing my boyfriend or I could do. We were in bed, hidden behind a door, while my father faced the danger alone. Sitting there and waiting to find out whether someone was going to shoot my father was the most frightening moment of my life. I felt helpless. Part of me wanted to run out and help him. Another part understood that adding more people to the confrontation might only create more targets. I did not know what my father was holding or whether he had any way to defend himself. I could hear him yelling at the stranger to leave. His voice sounded strong, but I knew he must have been afraid too. People often imagine that a parent stops feeling fear when protecting their family. That is not true. They act despite the fear. My father heard someone attacking the door and ran toward the sound because his wife, daughter, and another young person were inside. He placed himself closest to the danger. I remember gripping the bedding and trying not to make any noise. My boyfriend lay completely still beside me. We could hear our own breathing. Every second seemed much longer than normal. I waited for the sound of breaking wood. I waited for glass to shatter. I waited for a gunshot. None came. The banging eventually stopped. The shouting became less intense. There were more voices, but I could not understand what was being said. The immediate danger seemed to be passing. but I did not trust the silence. The person might have moved to another side of the house. He could be trying a window. He might have gone toward the front door. We stayed in the room until my parents told us it was safe. When we finally came out, the house felt different. The same hallway, kitchen, and doors were still there, but the idea that someone had been trying to enter changed everything. We learned that the person outside was a young man. He was apparently a wealthy college fraternity student who had been drinking heavily. His explanation was that he believed our house was his house. According to him, he had become confused and gone to the wrong address. That explanation might sound reasonable at first. Drunk people make mistakes. They enter the wrong apartment building, try the wrong hotel room, or become confused about where they are. If he had only knocked once, tested the handle, and stepped away after my father told him he had the wrong house, I could accept that he was simply intoxicated. But that was not what happened. He had tried hard to get inside. He had been banging against the back door with real force. My father clearly told him that it was not his home. Still, he continued. That was why I never completely believed the explanation. Even a very drunk person should react when an angry homeowner tells them they are at the wrong house. They might become confused. They might argue. They might apologize. But why keep trying to break down the door? Why was he at the back entrance instead of the front? How had he reached our yard? Had he really mistaken the entire house for his own? Or had he chosen the explanation after being caught? I do not know. Maybe he truly was so intoxicated that nothing made sense to him. Perhaps he had reached a level of drunkenness where he could not recognize the wrong building, the wrong yard, or the strangers yelling from inside. That possibility did not make him harmless. A person who is too intoxicated to understand where he is can still be dangerous. He could have broken through the door without intending to hurt anyone and then reacted violently when confronted. He could have believed my father was an intruder in what he imagined was his own home. Confusion does not prevent violence. Sometimes it causes it. I kept thinking about the lock. My boyfriend had remembered to secure the door because I reminded him. What would have happened if he had forgotten? The stranger might have turned the handle and walked inside. My parents could have awakened to a man already in the kitchen or hallway. My father would not have had a locked door between them. There would have been no time to understand what was happening. The encounter might have become physical immediately. My boyfriend and I might have awakened only after hearing a fight. That small action, turning the lock before coming to bed, may have protected all of us. For several nights afterward, every sound near the back of the house made me nervous. A branch hitting the wall sounded like someone testing the door. A neighbor closing a gate made me sit up. If the house settled and wood shifted, I listened for footsteps. I also started checking the locks myself. It was no longer enough to assume someone else had done it. Before bed, I would test the back door and sometimes return a few minutes later to test it again. I knew the stranger was gone. I knew the incident had ended. Still, my body remembered lying in bed and waiting for a gunshot. That is the strange thing about fear. The danger can disappear, but the waiting remains inside you. I did not see the man clearly. I was not the person standing at the door. I was physically safe in another room. Yet the experience affected me because I knew someone I loved was only a few feet from an unknown threat. There was nothing I could do to control the outcome. I think helplessness is one of the strongest forms of fear. If I had been facing the stranger myself, I might have focused on fighting, running, or speaking. Instead, I could only listen. I had to create images from sounds. The banging became a man breaking through the door. My father's shouting became a confrontation with a weapon. The silence became the moment before a gunshot. My mind filled every unknown space with the worst possible answer. When people heard the story later, some found the ending almost funny. A drunk fraternity guy went to the wrong house. He thought he was home. He scared a family and probably woke up embarrassed the next day. It could be told as a ridiculous college story. Maybe he told it that way himself. He might have laughed with his friends about the night he tried to enter someone else's house. For us, it was not funny. We did not know who he was while he was attacking the door. We did not know he was a student from a wealthy family. We did not know whether he was confused, angry, violent, or armed. People become harmless in stories only after you know the ending. During the event, every possibility is still open. The person could be lost. He could also be there to rob the house. He could be running from someone. He could be trying to hurt a person inside. You do not get to choose the most comforting explanation while the door is shaking. You prepare for the worst, because the worst is still possible. I also felt guilty afterward because my boyfriend had almost forgotten to lock the door. I had been annoyed with him when he returned. He was apologizing, and I cut him off because I was tired. Then I told him to lock up. For a while, I wondered whether my irritation had somehow helped save us. If we had continued the conversation, maybe he would have become distracted and forgotten. If I had already been asleep, he might have assumed someone else locked the door. It was a strange thing to think about. An ordinary reminder given during a small argument became part of a much more serious event. The experience made me understand how safety often depends on habits that feel unimportant. Locking the door, checking a window, keeping a phone nearby, knowing where family members are. Most nights, those actions change nothing. Then one night, someone tries to come inside. I still wonder about the young man. I wonder whether he remembers the incident. Was he truly that drunk? Did he wake up with no memory of the house or my father yelling at him? Did anyone explain how close he came to being attacked by a frightened homeowner? He was lucky too. My father could have been armed. Another person might have fired through the door. The young man's mistake could have ended his own life. Trying to force entry into an occupied home is dangerous, no matter what the reason is. If he really believed the house belonged to him, then alcohol had removed his ability to protect himself or anyone else. If he was lying, then I still do not know what he wanted. Neither answer feels comforting. The event happened years ago, but the part I remember most clearly is waking to my parents whispering. Their voices carried enough fear to wake me before I understood the words. Then the banging began. Then my father ran. "This isn't your house, fucker." That sentence still brings back the entire night. I remember placing my hand over my boyfriend's mouth. I remember his confused eyes opening. I remember whispering that someone was trying to break in. I remember telling him my father was handling it, even though I had no idea whether my father was safe. Then we lay there and waited. I do not think I had ever felt so young. I was almost 22. I had a job, a boyfriend, and an adult life beginning. But in that moment, I was only a daughter listening to her father place himself between his family and a stranger. I wanted him to come back down the hallway. I wanted to hear his footsteps and know he was alive. Nothing else mattered. The stranger never entered. No gunshot came. My father was not injured. The story ended with an intoxicated young man claiming he had mistaken our home for his own. Compared with stories involving actual attacks, injuries, or deaths, maybe this seems small. But fear is not measured only by what finally happens. Sometimes it comes from knowing what could happen in the next second. For several minutes, I believed the door might break. I believed an armed stranger might enter. I believed my father could be shot while trying to protect us. The fact that none of those things happened does not erase what it felt like to wait. I am grateful my boyfriend locked the door. I am grateful my father was able to make the man leave. I am grateful that the stranger did not have a weapon, or at least did not use one. But I still do not believe that he was merely a harmless drunk person who made a simple mistake. Harmless people do not usually try that hard to force their way through someone else's door. Maybe there is an explanation I will never understand. All I know is that the banging was real. The fear in my parents' voices was real. And for one terrible moment, I lay in the darkness, waiting to find out whether the next sound would be someone shooting my father. A couple of years ago, I went through a series of electroconvulsive therapy treatments, usually called ECT, to help treat my depression. By that point, I had already tried other forms of treatment, and ECT was presented as another option that might help when other things had not worked well enough. Before receiving the treatments, the medical staff explained the procedure to me. ECT uses a controlled electrical current to cause a brief seizure in the brain. The seizure is supposed to create changes in brain activity that can reduce serious symptoms of depression. It sounds frightening when it is described plainly, but the modern procedure is done under medical supervision with several safety steps in place. One of those steps involves giving the patient a muscle relaxant. Without it, the seizure could cause strong movements throughout the body. The muscles might contract violently, which could lead to injuries and increase the body's need for oxygen. The medication prevents most of that physical movement. The brain still experiences the seizure, but the body remains mostly still. There is one obvious problem with that. A muscle relaxant powerful enough to stop those movements also affects the muscles used for breathing. It can leave the patient temporarily unable to breathe independently. It can also create the terrifying feeling of being completely trapped inside the body. For that reason, the muscle relaxant is given only after the patient has been put under a short general anesthetic. The person is supposed to remain unconscious through the procedure, and while the most powerful effects of the relaxant are active. Medical staff control the patient's breathing during that period. The entire process is normally very short. You are prepared, put to sleep, given the relaxant, treated, and then awakened after the procedure is complete. That was how my earlier sessions had gone. I would arrive at the hospital or clinic, go through the usual checks, and meet the team responsible for the treatment. There were nurses, doctors, and an anesthetist. They would place monitoring equipment on me and prepare an intravenous line. Someone would explain what they were doing, even though I had already heard it during previous sessions. Then, the anesthetic would enter my bloodstream. There would be a few seconds of strange heaviness. The room would begin slipping away. The next thing I knew, I would be waking in the recovery area. I might feel tired, confused, or sore, but I would have no memory of the actual treatment. That was how it was supposed to work. During one session, something went wrong. The beginning felt completely normal. I was lying on the treatment bed while the staff prepared the equipment. There were 4 people in the room, including 2 doctors. They attached the monitors and checked everything. The room had the usual hospital smell, a mixture of disinfectant, clean bedding, plastic, and cold air. Machines stood close to the bed. Wires and tubes ran between equipment and my body. The staff spoke in calm, professional voices. Nothing gave me a reason to think this session would be different from the others. The anesthetic was administered. I felt myself becoming sleepy. My thoughts slowed down. The ceiling above me became difficult to focus on. Voices moved farther away. Then, everything disappeared. While I was unconscious, the muscle relaxant was given. The staff prepared to begin the act. But the machine malfunctioned. It failed to trigger the seizure. I did not know any of this at the time. The amount of anesthesia used for ACT is small, because the whole procedure is meant to happen very quickly. Under normal circumstances, the seizure and treatment process continue while the patient remains unconscious. In my case, no seizure occurred. The treatment stopped before it truly began. Because the anesthesia was so brief, I began waking much sooner than anyone expected. The muscle relaxant, however, was still fully active. I became aware slowly. At first, I did not understand that I was awake. There was no clear moment when my eyes opened and everything immediately made sense. The world returned in pieces. I heard voices. I saw light. I became aware of the pressure of my body against the bed. Then I realized I could not move. I tried to open my eyes wider. I am not sure how much control I had over them, but I could see at least part of the room. The image was limited and strange, almost as though I were looking through a narrow opening. I could hear the staff talking around me. They did not sound worried. That confused me. I tried to move my hand. Nothing happened. I tried again. Not even a finger responded. I attempted to turn my head. My neck remained completely still. Then I tried to breathe. I could not. That was when fear took over. My mind was awake. I could hear. I could see. I could think clearly enough to understand that something was terribly wrong. But my body was completely paralyzed. Even my breathing muscles would not respond. I told myself to inhale. Nothing happened. I tried to force my chest to rise. It did not move. There was no feeling of air entering my lungs. I tried again, harder, as if effort alone might overcome the medication. Still nothing. Panic flooded through me. I wanted to tell the staff that I was awake. I wanted to shout. I wanted to make any sound at all. My mouth would not move. My tongue felt useless. My throat produced nothing. I tried to blink rapidly. I do not know if my eyelids moved enough for anyone to notice. I tried moving my eyes from side to side. No one reacted. The staff continued speaking normally. They had not realized I was conscious. They were discussing the failed treatment. One person explained that the machine had malfunctioned and that the seizure had not been triggered. Another spoke about what had gone wrong and what they needed to do next. Their voices were calm because, from their point of view, the emergency had passed. The machine had failed, but I had not received the treatment. They assumed I was still unconscious and safe. I listened to them explain that nothing had happened while I was unable to breathe. I wanted to scream at them. I am awake. I can hear you. I cannot breathe. Please look at me. Please help me. The words were perfectly clear in my mind. None of them left my body. I was trapped inside myself. That is the only way I can describe it. My body no longer felt like something I controlled. It was only an unmoving object lying on the table while my thoughts remained locked inside. I could not turn toward the doctors. I could not lift my arm. I could not make my chest rise. I could not even create enough movement to show that I was afraid. The people standing around me were close enough to help, but they did not know I needed help. That made the situation even more terrifying. If I had been alone, the danger would have been obvious. But I was surrounded by trained medical professionals. They were only a few feet away. They were speaking calmly while I silently begged them to notice me. Time became difficult to understand. The whole experience may have lasted only a short time. Inside my mind, it seemed endless. When you cannot breathe, every second becomes enormous. I waited for my body to inhale automatically. It did not. The pressure in my chest grew. My thoughts became faster and more desperate. I tried to remember how long a person could survive without air. I wondered whether the staff were already breathing for me in some way I could not feel. Maybe oxygen was still moving into my lungs. Maybe I was panicking because the paralysis made breathing feel unnatural. But I could not trust that thought. All I knew was that I wanted to breathe and could not. The staff continued talking about the equipment. They explained that I had not received the treatment. Someone may have mentioned rescheduling or trying again later. Their words sounded distant, but I understood enough to know they did not realize I was conscious. I began trying every possible way to communicate. Move a finger, move a toe, blink, roll my eyes, make a sound, force the chest upward. Nothing worked. I had never felt so helpless. It was not like being physically restrained. If someone ties your hands, you can still pull against the rope. If something holds you down, you can still struggle. This was different. There was no resistance, because there was no movement at all. The command left my mind and disappeared before reaching my muscles. My body belonged to the medication. My thoughts began changing as the lack of air and panic increased. At first, I believed the staff would notice quickly. Then I wondered how long it might take. Then I started thinking they might not notice at all. I believed I was going to die. That may sound dramatic, especially because the room was full of medical staff and serious injury was probably unlikely. But in that moment, I did not know that. I could not breathe. I could not tell anyone. I had no way to know whether the machines were monitoring the right things or whether the staff would react before I lost consciousness. Death did not feel unlikely. It felt immediate. I thought about the terrible possibility that they might continue speaking while my oxygen level fell. Maybe an alarm would sound eventually. Maybe they would only realize something was wrong after my heart rate changed. Maybe they would save me. Maybe they would be too late. I could not ask. The panic became unbearable. There is a deep instinct inside the body that takes control when breathing stops. It does not care about logic. It does not care that doctors are nearby. It demands air. My mind screamed at my body to inhale. Again and again, nothing happened. I could feel myself becoming weaker. The room seemed to move farther away. The voices became less clear. My vision began to darken around the edges. I thought this was the end. I imagined losing consciousness and never waking again. Part of me hoped I would pass out quickly because being awake inside that paralysis was unbearable. Another part fought desperately to remain conscious because I believed that if I slipped away, no one would know what had happened. Then, just before everything disappeared, one member of the staff noticed. I do not know exactly what they saw. Maybe my eyes moved. Maybe a monitor changed. Maybe my expression revealed something. Perhaps they simply looked at me closely enough and understood. The calm atmosphere changed immediately. Someone grabbed the breathing mask or ventilation equipment. They pressed it tightly over my mouth and nose. Air was forced into my lungs. I could not breathe on my own, but the machine breathed for me. The mask covered my face. There was pressure around my mouth and nose. I heard movement and urgent voices. Then everything went black. I lost consciousness. When I woke again, only a few minutes had passed. This time, the room felt different. I was still lying down, and the breathing equipment was still helping me. Air moved into my lungs in a steady rhythm controlled by the machine. At first, I remained unable to move. The paralysis had not completely worn off, but I could feel small changes. My body was beginning to return. I tried to move my fingers. Nothing happened immediately. Then there may have been the smallest response. I focused on it. I tried again. Little by little, sensation returned to my arms and legs. My muscles felt heavy and disconnected. It was like waking from a deep sleep while every part of the body remained far away. The machine continued breathing for me. I waited for the moment when I could take a breath myself. That ability returned slowly. At first, I could only make a weak effort. The machine did most of the work. Then my chest began responding more strongly. I could feel air moving because of my own muscles. It was one of the greatest feelings of relief I have ever experienced. Breathing is something most people never think about. It happens automatically every minute of every day. You do not appreciate it until the ability disappears. When my body finally began inhaling again, I focused on every breath. In, out, in, out. I was alive. I could breathe. I tried to move my hands and feet. The strength returned gradually. The staff remained near me, watching closely. They now understood that I had awakened while the muscle relaxant was still active. Someone explained what had happened. The ECT machine had failed to produce the seizure. The short anesthetic had worn off too soon. The paralytic medication had lasted longer than the anesthesia. As a result, I regained awareness before I regained control of my body. They may have told me that I had been safe and that they had been monitoring me. They may have explained that the period was brief. I understood the medical explanation. It did not change what the experience had felt like. To them, it may have been a complication that lasted only moments and was corrected quickly. To me, it was an unknown length of time spent awake, unable to breathe, while 4 people stood nearby without realizing I was conscious. I remember trying to speak after the muscle control returned. My mouth and throat felt strange. My voice may have been weak. I wanted to tell them that I had heard everything. I wanted them to know I had been awake while they discussed the failed treatment. I wanted to explain how hard I had tried to move. I do not remember exactly what I said first. I only remember the need to make them understand. I had not been asleep. I had been there the whole time. I had heard their voices. I had believed I was dying. The staff seemed concerned and apologetic. They asked what I remembered. I described the conversation. That proved my awareness had been real. I could repeat parts of what they had said while they believed I was unconscious. That detail disturbed me. If my memory had been unclear, I might have wondered later whether it was only a dream. But I knew the discussion had happened. I knew they had talked about the equipment failure and the fact that the treatment had not been completed. Those words were still in my mind. The experience did not leave visible injuries. I recovered from the medication. My breathing returned. I could move again. The failed treatment did not cause the seizure, and the staff caught the problem before anything more serious occurred. Physically, I was fine. Emotionally, it was harder to dismiss. For days afterward, I kept remembering the feeling of telling my chest to move and receiving no response. I remembered the calm voices around me. I remembered how close help was and how impossible it felt to reach it. I began thinking about future treatments. The idea of being placed under anesthesia again became frightening. Before, the process had felt simple. I would fall asleep and wake later. Now I knew there was a place between those moments where awareness could return before movement. I imagined it happening again. What if the staff did not notice as quickly next time? What if I remained conscious during the electrical treatment itself? What if I woke while unable to speak and no one believed me afterward? These thoughts made it difficult to trust the procedure. I understood that complications are rare. I understood that medical teams prepare for them. I understood that the problem had been recognized and corrected. Fear does not always disappear because something is statistically unlikely. I had already experienced the unlikely thing. I no longer had the comfort of believing it could not happen. The memory also changed the way I thought about paralysis. Before, I imagined not being able to move as a physical problem. I did not understand the mental terror of remaining fully aware. The worst part was not only the lack of movement, it was the complete loss of communication. I could not show pain. I could not ask for help. I could not tell anyone I was conscious. My entire existence had been reduced to thoughts no one else could see. There were moments when I wondered whether the staff would assume every sign from my body was caused by the medication or monitors. What if my eyes had moved and they dismissed it? What if I had managed to twitch a finger but no one noticed? I was dependent on another person looking closely enough to understand. Thankfully, someone did. I do not blame the staff for intentionally ignoring me. They believed I was still under anesthesia. The machine had malfunctioned, creating an unusual situation. Once someone realized what was happening, they responded and supported my breathing. But knowing that does not erase the panic. A frightening experience does not require someone to act maliciously. Sometimes every person in the room is trying to help, and you can still believe you are about to die. For a while, I questioned whether I was being overly dramatic. I told myself that the event had lasted only a short time. I reminded myself that my oxygen and heart rate were probably being monitored. I knew medical staff would not simply allow me to suffocate. But when I returned to the memory, I did not remember statistics or safety procedures. I remembered the command to breathe. I remembered nothing happening. I remembered hearing people speak while I was locked inside an unmoving body. That fear was real, even if the danger was controlled. The experience also made me appreciate how much trust the patient gives to medical professionals. During anesthesia, you surrender everything. You cannot monitor your own condition. You cannot protect yourself. You depend on the people around you to watch your breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, and level of consciousness. Most of the time, that trust is rewarded. The procedure happens safely, and you wake without ever knowing what occurred. During that treatment, the system failed for a short time. My awareness returned before my ability to communicate. For those moments, I was completely dependent on someone noticing. I still remember the relief of the mask being pressed over my face. Normally, having something tight over the nose and mouth might feel frightening. That day, it meant air. It meant someone had finally understood. It meant I might survive. Then, the darkness came, and I welcomed it. When I woke the second time, the slow return of movement felt almost miraculous. A finger, a hand, the chest beginning to respond. The first breath I knew was partly mine. Those small actions felt more important than anything else. People sometimes describe waking during anesthesia as hearing voices or feeling pressure while being unable to react. My experience was made worse by the muscle relaxant affecting my breathing. I did not only feel trapped, I felt as though my body had forgotten the most basic thing required to remain alive. Even now, when I think about it, I sometimes take a deeper breath without meaning to. It is as if my body needs to prove that it still can. I can fill my lungs. I can move. I can speak. I can tell someone when something is wrong. At the time, I eventually continued recovering and left the medical area. Life continued. The depression that had brought me there still needed treatment. I had to decide how much fear I would allow the incident to create. But the memory remained. It is not the electricity or seizure that I remember most. The actual act never happened during that session. The machine failed before it could begin. What I remember is waking into silence inside my own body. I remember seeing the room without being able to turn my head. I remember 4 people standing close by. I remember them explaining the malfunction while I tried to tell them I was conscious. I remember the growing pressure in my lungs. I remember thinking, this is how I am going to die. Then someone finally saw me. The mask came down over my face. Air entered my lungs. And everything went black. A few minutes later, I woke again and slowly regained control of my body while a machine continued breathing for me. Each movement returned one piece at a time. Each breath became easier. Eventually, I could move, speak, and breathe without help. But for those few moments before the staff noticed, I was fully awake, completely paralyzed, and unable to tell anyone that I was still there. This happened last year, around Christmas, and I still think about it more often than I would like to admit. At the time, I was working late night shifts. My schedule was exhausting, and I usually did not get home until somewhere between 3 and 3:30 in the morning. By then, the whole apartment building would be quiet. Most of the neighbors were asleep, the roads were almost empty, and I would come home feeling as though I were the only person awake in the world. My husband and our 3-year-old daughter were always asleep by the time I returned. Because we lived in a small apartment, I had learned how to enter quietly. The front door made a soft clicking sound if I turned the handle too quickly, and the floor near the entrance creaked in one particular place. I knew where to step, how to lower my bag without dropping it, and how to take off my shoes without making enough noise to wake anyone. My daughter was a light sleeper on some nights. If I accidentally woke her, she might become excited that I was home and refuse to go back to sleep. Then my husband would wake too, and all three of us would be exhausted the next day. So I always tried to move like a thief entering my own home. That night had been a normal shift, just long and tiring. I remember driving home with the heater running, staring at nearly empty streets decorated with Christmas lights. Some houses had glowing reindeer in their yards. Others had white lights wrapped around trees or red and green bulbs hanging from roofs. It was that strange time of night when Christmas decorations looked both beautiful and lonely. There were no families outside admiring them. No children were running through the yards. There were only quiet houses and lights shining for people who were already asleep. By the time I reached our apartment, I could feel the exhaustion behind my eyes. My body wanted to go straight to bed, but I was thirsty. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The apartment was dark except for the Christmas tree. We had placed it in the living room, not far from the kitchen. It was not a huge tree because we did not have much space, but our daughter loved it. We had decorated it together with colorful ornaments, cheap silver garland, and strings of warm lights. Every night, the tree gave the apartment a soft glow. Normally, my husband switched the lights off before going to bed. That night, either he had forgotten or had decided to leave them on for me. The living room was filled with red, green, gold, and blue light. The colors reflected on the walls and on the shiny ornaments. Everything beyond the tree remained shadowy. I closed the door quietly behind me. I put down my things and removed my shoes. No one moved in the bedroom. The apartment was silent. I walked toward the kitchen to get a glass or bottle of water. Our kitchen opened into the living area, so from the refrigerator, I could see part of the room without turning around completely. There was a stool near the Christmas tree. It was something our daughter sometimes sat on while looking at the decorations. I opened the refrigerator. The light inside came on, brighter and colder than the glow from the tree. I leaned down and started looking for water. That was when I saw my daughter from the corner of my eye. She was sitting on the stool beside the Christmas tree. The sight did not frighten me at first. It seemed completely real and completely normal. I clearly remember the shape of her small body beneath the colored lights. She was sitting quietly, facing in my direction, wearing the new pajamas we had bought for her a couple of weeks earlier. They were the kind of pajamas she had been excited to wear. I remember the pattern and the way the fabric looked under the Christmas lights. There was no mistaking who I saw. It was my daughter. I was still leaning into the refrigerator when I noticed her. I laughed softly because I assumed she had heard me come home and climbed out of bed. And just, "What are you doing awake, Missy?" I said. My voice was playful. I expected her to smile, answer me, or run toward me. Maybe she had woken and seen the tree lights through the bedroom doorway. Maybe she had come out to wait for me. That would have been unusual at 3 in the morning, but children do strange things when they are half asleep. I reached for the water and began standing up. The entire movement took only a second. When I looked directly toward the stool, she was gone. The seat was empty. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. I remained standing in front of the open refrigerator with the water in my hand, staring at the empty stool. The Christmas tree lights continued blinking. The colored glow moved across the seat where my daughter had just been sitting. I thought she must have jumped down and run toward the bedroom, but that did not make sense. Our apartment was small. The bedroom was not far away, but there was no way a 3-year-old could climb down from the stool, cross the living area, and reach the room in complete silence during the short moment when I stood up. I would have hurt her. She did not move quietly. At that age, she ran with quick, heavy little steps. Her feet would slap against the floor. She might bump into furniture or breathe loudly while trying not to laugh. The stool itself should have made noise if she climbed down quickly. I had heard nothing. There had been no shuffle of feet, no movement of clothing, no giggle, no bedroom door, nothing. I froze. The refrigerator remained open behind me, but I forgot about it. Cold air touched my arm while I stared at the stool. I kept expecting my daughter to lean out from behind the couch or appear in the hallway. Maybe she was playing a game. Maybe she had hidden when I spoke. But there was nowhere close enough for her to disappear so quickly. The space beside the tree was open. I could see the floor around the stool. She was not behind the curtains. She was not under the table. She was simply gone. I replayed what I had seen. I had only noticed her through the corner of my eye, but the image was clear. She had been sitting upright. She had been wearing the new pajamas. The Christmas lights had reflected on her face and clothes. I had not seen a vague shadow or shape that might have been a child. I had seen my daughter. For a few seconds, I was too frightened to move. A strange thought entered my mind. What if the child in the bedroom was not there? What if she had somehow gotten out of the apartment? What if I had seen her sitting by the tree and then she had vanished because something was wrong? The thoughts were not logical, but it was 3 in the morning. I was exhausted, and I had just watched my daughter disappear without making a sound. I finally closed the refrigerator. The small click seemed loud in the silent apartment. I walked toward the bedroom. I moved carefully, still expecting to see her somewhere in the living room. The Christmas tree lights cast moving shadows across the walls. Ornaments turned slightly in the warm air, making little reflections that appeared and vanished. Every shifting light made me look again. I reached the bedroom doorway. My husband was asleep. Beside him, our daughter was lying in her bed, completely still. I stood there and watched her for a moment. Her breathing was slow and even. She was deeply asleep. I moved closer to make sure. I touched her gently. She did not wake. There was no sign that she had recently been running through the apartment. Her hair was slightly messy from sleep, and her face was relaxed. Then I noticed her pajamas. She was not wearing the ones I had seen beside the tree. The child on the stool had been wearing the new pajamas we had bought a few weeks earlier. My daughter in bed was wearing a different set. That detail disturbed me more than anything else. If I had only seen a small shape near the tree, I could have blamed the lights and shadows. If I had seen someone wearing the same pajamas as my sleeping daughter, I might have believed my exhausted mind had remembered what she was wearing and placed that image in the room. But the pajamas were different. The image near the tree had included a specific detail that did not match reality. I stood beside her bed, looking down at her, and tried to understand what had happened. Maybe she had changed pajamas during the night. That was impossible. She was 3. She could not have quietly changed clothes placed the other pajamas somewhere, gone into the living room, and returned to sleep in seconds. Maybe I had remembered the clothes incorrectly. But even now, I can still picture them. I knew exactly which pair she had been wearing in the living room. The image was too clear. I checked the bedroom floor. The new pajamas were not lying there. I looked toward the closet and dresser. Everything seemed normal. My husband continued sleeping, unaware that I was standing there frightened and confused. I considered waking him. I wanted to tell him what I had seen and ask him whether our daughter had been awake earlier. But I also knew how the story would sound. I had come home after an exhausting shift at 3 in the morning. I saw something from the corner of my eye. When I looked directly at it, nothing was there. The obvious explanation was that I had imagined it. Maybe waking him would only frighten him or make him worry about how little sleep I was getting. So I did not wake him immediately. I returned to the living room. The stool remained empty. I switched on another light. The ordinary overhead light changed the entire room. The Christmas tree no longer looked mysterious. The stool was just a piece of furniture. The shadows disappeared. I checked around it. There was nothing there that could have looked exactly like my daughter. No pile of clothes. No doll sitting on the seat. No blanket arranged in the shape of a person. The stool was completely empty. I looked at the Christmas ornaments and wondered if several reflections had combined to create the image. But reflections do not create detailed pajamas. They do not create the familiar shape of your child's head and body. They do not sit still long enough for you to speak to them. I remembered that I had not felt afraid while looking at her. My brain had accepted the sight immediately. There had been no moment of confusion where I wondered what the shape was. I saw my daughter, laughed, and spoke to her. Only when I stood up and looked directly did the image disappear. That made me question my own mind. How much can exhaustion change what a person sees? I had been sleeping badly for weeks. Working late shifts affected my entire routine. I would come home after 3, try to sleep, then wake again to care for my daughter and handle normal responsibilities. Even when I had time to rest, my body sometimes refused. Daylight came through the windows. Neighbors made noise, and my mind remained alert from work. I lived in a constant state of tiredness. Maybe my brain had entered a moment between waking and dreaming. Perhaps I saw the stool, expected my daughter to be there, and created the rest of the image. Parents become so used to seeing their children in familiar places that the mind may fill in missing information. Our daughter loved the Christmas tree. She often sat near it. The new pajamas were connected to the same holiday season. Maybe my exhausted brain combined those memories into one vivid picture. That is the explanation I have always tried to accept. It is reasonable. It makes sense. Severe tiredness can cause strange experiences. People hear their names being called when no one is there. They see movement in shadows. Some even experience brief hallucinations. I had been working long hours and sleeping very little. There was no reason to believe anything supernatural had happened. Still, the memory never felt like an ordinary mistake. I have mistaken objects for people before. Everyone has. You see a coat hanging in a dark room and think someone is standing there. You notice a shadow moving and turn your head quickly. But those mistakes disappear the moment you focus on them. They are vague. This was not vague. I remember my daughter's posture. I remember the way she sat. I remember the pajamas. I remember the quiet feeling of seeing her awake when she should have been sleeping. The image seemed stable enough that I spoke a full sentence to her. Then it vanished. I checked the apartment again before going to bed. I made sure the front door was locked. I checked the windows. I looked in the bathroom and closets. even though I knew there was no stranger in the home. The fear was not exactly that someone had entered. The figure had been my daughter. That made it harder to understand. If I had seen an unknown person, I could have called the police or searched for signs of a break-in. But what do you do when you see your own child sitting in a room while that same child is asleep in bed? I eventually changed my clothes and lay down. I did not sleep easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the stool beside the Christmas tree. I imagined standing up more quickly and catching the figure moving. I wondered whether it had looked at me. I could not clearly remember the face. That part is strange. I knew it was my daughter, but I cannot say exactly what expression she had. She may have been looking toward me. She may have been looking at the tree. The memory becomes less certain when I try to focus on her face. The clothes and body are clear. The face is not. That supports the idea that it was a tired mind creating an image. Maybe I recognized the shape as my child without seeing actual facial details. But even that explanation does not completely calm me. The next morning, everything seemed normal. My daughter woke up cheerful. She had no memory of getting out of bed. I did not seriously expect her to remember because I had seen her sleeping, but I still watched her closely. I asked whether she had come into the living room during the night. She looked confused and said no. I asked if she had wanted to see the Christmas tree. She said she had been sleeping. My husband had not heard her move either. I told him what happened. He listened, but did not know what to say. He suggested I was probably exhausted. I agreed. That became the official explanation in our home. I had worked late. I was barely sleeping. The colored lights, shadows, and familiar stool confused my vision. My brain created an image of our daughter because she often sat there. Nothing more had happened. For the rest of the Christmas season, I looked at that stool differently. Whenever the tree lights were on and the apartment was otherwise dark, I expected to see her sitting there again. Sometimes I would turn on the overhead light before entering the kitchen late at night. I did not want to look toward the living room and see that small figure. The experience did not repeat itself. I never saw my daughter in two places again. I did not hear voices or notice strange movement. Nothing unusual happened in the apartment afterward. That should have helped me forget. Instead, the fact that it happened only once made it feel even more mysterious. There was no pattern to study, no second event that might provide an explanation. Only one clear moment during an exhausting night. As time passed, I thought about other possibilities. Perhaps I had entered a very brief dream while still standing. People can experience microsleeps when they are extremely tired. The brain shuts down for a few seconds, even though the person appears awake. Maybe I opened the refrigerator, slipped into a dreamlike state, and saw my daughter beside the tree. When I stood, I fully woke. That could explain why the image felt so real. Dreams often feel completely normal until we wake from them. But I was moving, reaching for water, and speaking. Could a microsleep create such a complete scene? I do not know. I also wondered whether I had seen a memory instead of something physically present. Maybe my brain replayed an earlier moment when my daughter sat on the stool wearing those pajamas. The Christmas season was full of similar images. She had been excited about the tree and often wanted to sit nearby. Perhaps I had seen her in that exact position days earlier, and exhaustion caused the memory to appear over the real room. That is another reasonable explanation. Still, it raises another question. Why that memory? Why at 3 in the morning? Why did it appear so clearly in the same physical space? Sometimes I thought about the more frightening interpretations. I tried not to, but they entered my mind anyway. People tell stories about seeing copies of loved ones. They talk about doubles, warnings, spirits, or strange figures that appear in familiar forms. I have never been sure what I believe about those stories. I do not know whether ghosts exist. I do not know if people can see things that have no ordinary explanation. Most strange experiences probably come from tiredness, fear, poor lighting, or the way the brain processes information. Mine probably did too. But when the person you see is your 3-year-old daughter, it is difficult not to wonder. Was it only an image? Was it something trying to look like her? Was it a dream that somehow entered the room? Those questions sound dramatic in daylight. At 3 in the morning, beside a glowing Christmas tree, they feel possible. I became especially disturbed by the thought that the figure had been sitting silently. My daughter was rarely silent when awake. If she saw me come home, she would normally call for me, smile, or climb down to hug me. The child on the stool did none of those things. She simply sat there. I had assumed it was her because of the shape and clothes, but the behavior was wrong. Maybe that was why the question I asked received no answer. And just, what are you doing awake, Missy? Nothing. Then she was gone. I never found out whether the Christmas tree had been left on by accident. My husband may have forgotten to switch it off. That was probably all. But part of me wondered whether the lights were necessary for me to see what I saw. Without them, the living room would have been completely dark. The tree created just enough light to show the stool and the figure without giving me a clear view. It was the perfect setting for a tired mind to make a mistake, or for something else to be seen only briefly. After the holidays, we removed the decorations and put the stool back in its usual place. The apartment returned to normal. Without the tree, the room did not feel frightening. The memory became something I could push aside during the day. Then, another Christmas season arrived, and I thought about it again. Colored lights in a dark room brought the image back immediately. I would see pictures of children sitting near Christmas trees and remember the small figure on the stool. It was not a dramatic or violent memory. That somehow made it more unsettling. Nothing attacked me. Nothing spoke. Nothing moved toward my daughter. I only saw something that should not have been possible. For a few seconds, my child was in the living room and the bedroom at the same time. One version was sitting awake beneath the Christmas lights. The real one was sleeping peacefully in bed. I still believe exhaustion is the most likely explanation. I had been working terrible hours. I was not getting enough sleep. My eyes caught a shape in poor lighting, and my brain turned it into the person I expected to see. That is what I tell myself. It is the explanation that lets the memory remain strange without becoming terrifying. But every time I repeat it, I remember the pajamas. The pair my daughter was wearing in bed was not the pair I saw beside the tree. The figure wore the new ones we had bought weeks earlier. I remember them clearly. Maybe my exhausted mind selected that memory because the pajamas were new and connected to Christmas. Maybe I only decided they were different after the fact. Memory is not perfect. It changes each time we revisit it. I understand all of that. But I also remember how natural it felt to see her. There was no uncertainty until she vanished. For one ordinary second, I was a tired mother coming home from work and finding her daughter awake near the tree. Then I stood up, and the apartment became a place I did not understand. Years from now, I may forget many details about that job. I may forget the exact roads I drove home, the names of coworkers, or what happened during most shifts. I do not think I will forget that night. I will remember the refrigerator light. I will remember the Christmas tree glowing in the dark living room. I will remember seeing my daughter sitting on the stool in her new pajamas. I will remember laughing softly and asking why she was awake. And I will remember standing up to find nothing there. The stool was empty. The apartment was silent. My daughter was asleep in another room, wearing completely different clothes. Maybe I was only exhausted. Maybe my brain created the entire image. That is probably what happened. But it never happened before. It has never happened again. And even now, whenever I see a Christmas tree glowing in a dark room, part of me expects to find a small child sitting beside it, waiting silently for me to notice. Almost no one I have told in real life believes this story. Most people laugh, tell me I imagined it, or say the scratch must have already been there. I understand why they react that way. If someone told me the same thing now, I would probably look for a normal explanation too. I do not really believe in ghosts, demons, or paranormal rituals. I have never seen anything supernatural before or since. Still, this happened to me when I was in grade 5, and I remember it clearly enough that thinking about it still makes me uncomfortable. At that age, I became completely obsessed with Bloody Mary. It started when a girl at school told my friends and me about the legend. I do not remember exactly where she first heard it. Maybe an older sibling told her, or perhaps she found it online. Stories like that spread quickly among children because they are frightening enough to be exciting, but simple enough for anyone to try. The basic story was that Bloody Mary was some kind of ghost, witch, or demon who could be summoned through a mirror. Different people had different versions. Some said she had been murdered. Others said she had lost a child. Some believed she was a queen from history, while others claimed she was not human at all. The details did not matter much to us. What mattered was the ritual. You were supposed to enter a dark room with a mirror. Some versions said it had to be a bathroom. Others said any mirror would work. You placed 2 lit candles beside the glass, stood in front of it, and said Bloody Mary 3 times. In the version we believed, you also had to spin around after saying her name. When you turned back toward the mirror, Bloody Mary would appear behind you, or inside the reflection. Some people said she would only show her face. Some said she would scream. Others claimed she would scratch you, drag you into the mirror, or kill you. The more frightening the story became, the more interested we were. It turned into an unhealthy obsession. During school, my friends and I would search for information about Bloody Mary whenever we had access to a computer. We looked for supposed photographs, stories from people who claimed the ritual worked, and instructions describing the correct way to summon her. The internet at the time was filled with badly designed websites, strange forums, blurry pictures, and stories that were obviously invented. We knew some of it was fake, but that did not stop us from reading everything. A blurry face in a mirror would keep us talking for hours. Someone would claim a girl had tried the ritual and disappeared. Another story would say a person found scratches on their face afterward. We would scare one another at school, then continue discussing it at home through Messenger. At night, the story felt much more believable. It is easy to laugh at a mirror ritual while sitting in a bright classroom surrounded by friends. It is different when you are alone in a dark house and your own reflection is the only face in the room. My friends and I kept daring one another to try it. Most of us claimed we would, but no one wanted to be the first. Someone would say they attempted it, but stopped after saying the name once. Another person would insist they had seen something move, but refused to give details. I wanted to prove that I was not scared. Like many children, I cared more about appearing brave than making a sensible decision. So I told my friends I would perform the ritual at midnight. I made the promise confidently. I said I would use real candles, turn off the lights, say the name 3 times, spin around, and look directly into the mirror. I may even have claimed I would message them afterward and describe what happened. Part of me did not believe anything would happen. Another part of me was terrified that it might. That fear was exactly why I felt I had to do it. The night I chose was especially strange because my parents were going out. I believe they were attending a funeral, though I am not completely certain after all these years. Looking back, the possibility that they were at a funeral makes the entire night feel darker, as though death was already connected to the evening before I ever lit the candles. At the time, however, I was mostly excited that I would be home alone. There would be no parent knocking on the door or asking why I had candles near a mirror at midnight. I could perform the ritual exactly as my friends and I had discussed it. Before leaving, my parents gave me the usual instructions. Keep the doors locked. Do not open the door for anyone. Call if there's an emergency. Do not stay up too late. I agreed to everything. I did not tell them that I planned to spend midnight trying to summon a demon through a mirror. After they left, the house felt normal for a while. I watched television, used the computer, and probably ate snacks. I kept checking the time. The closer it got to midnight, the less brave I felt. At 11, the ritual seemed like a funny challenge. At 11:30, I began thinking about every story we had read. By 11:50, I was considering giving up and lying to my friends the next day. I could say I had tried it and nothing happened. No one would know. But I imagined them asking questions. Did you use candles? Did you spin around? Did you look directly into the mirror? What if they realized I was lying? I did not want to be the scared one in the group, so I continued. A few minutes before midnight, I found 2 candles. I do not remember whether they were regular household candles or decorative ones, but they were small enough to place near the mirror. I also found something to light them. Walking through the house with the candles in my hands felt more serious than discussing the ritual online. I chose a mirror in a room with a curtain behind me. I remember that detail clearly because the curtain became important later. The mirror was large enough for me to see my upper body and some of the room behind me. When I stood in front of it, the curtain appeared over my shoulder in the reflection. I placed 1 candle on each side of the mirror. I checked the time. It was midnight, or close enough that it counted. I turned off the main light. The room immediately changed. The candles gave off far less light than I expected. Their flames created a weak yellow glow that moved across the walls. Shadows shifted whenever the flames flickered. My own face looked strange in the mirror. The light came from below and from both sides, making my eyes appear darker and changing the shape of my features. I knew it was only the candles, but I already looked less like myself. The rest of the room disappeared into darkness. I could see the curtain behind me, but not clearly. Everything beyond the small area of candlelight looked deeper and farther away. I stood there for a while without beginning. My heart was beating quickly. I felt embarrassed even though no one was watching. I knew I was afraid of a children's story. I reminded myself that mirrors do not summon demons, and that saying a name cannot make a dead woman appear. Finally, I took a breath. "Bloody Mary," I said. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet house. Nothing happened. The candle flames continued moving. I said it again. "Bloody Mary." Still nothing. I almost stopped. I had completed 2 of the 3 repetitions. If I quit then, I could tell myself I had been sensible. But I also knew I would always wonder about the 3rd time. So I said it once more. "Bloody Mary." Then I spun around. I do not remember whether I turned 3 times or only once. Different versions of the ritual gave different instructions, and my memory of the exact movement is not perfect. What I remember is becoming briefly dizzy. The candlelight moved across the room as I turned. The shadows seemed to spin with me. Then I faced the mirror again. I looked directly into the glass. For a second, I expected to see another face. I expected a pale woman standing behind me, blood on her clothes, her dark eyes staring through the mirror. There was nothing. only my reflection. I looked behind my own reflected body. The room was empty. The curtain was still. The candles remained lit. I waited. Nothing changed. My fear slowly turned into relief. Then relief became disappointment. After all the stories and all the excitement, the ritual had done absolutely nothing. There was no ghost, no demon, no scream, no face in the mirror. I had not died. I had not been pulled into the glass. It was exactly what a reasonable person would expect. I may have laughed quietly at myself. I felt foolish for being so frightened. I had spent weeks reading stories and worrying about a name spoken in front of a mirror, and the result was 2 candles burning in a dark room. Then, only a few seconds later, the curtain behind me moved. It did not shift gently. It blew inward as though a strong gust of wind had struck it. I saw the movement in the mirror first. The fabric lifted and pushed forward behind me. I turned around immediately. The curtain was still moving. My entire body became cold. The obvious explanation was that the window behind it was open. Maybe I had forgotten about it. Maybe my parents had left it open earlier. A sudden breeze could easily move the curtain. I went toward it and pulled the fabric aside. The window was closed. I checked the lock. It was secure. I placed my hand near the edges, expecting to feel cold air entering through a gap. There was nothing. The room was still. I looked around for another source of air. Maybe a vent had switched on. Maybe a door somewhere in the house had opened. Maybe the heating or cooling system had created a current. I could not find anything that explained the strength of the movement. The curtain had not simply trembled. It had moved like wind struck it. I stood near the window and listened. The house remained silent. There were no footsteps outside, no voices, no sound of a door closing. I began to regret performing the ritual. Seconds earlier, I had been certain nothing supernatural had happened. Now my imagination connected the moving curtain to everything I had read. Maybe something had appeared behind me. Maybe I had turned around too late to see it. Maybe the curtain had moved because someone or something passed through it. I tried to reject those thoughts. It was a curtain. Curtains move. Old houses have drafts. There had to be an explanation. I returned to the mirror because I wanted to blow out the candles and turn on the lights. I no longer cared about proving I was brave. I wanted the room bright again. As I approached, I noticed something on the mirror. There was a scratch in the glass. I stopped. The mark had not been there before. At least I had never noticed it. It was long enough to be obvious in the candlelight. A thin line cut across the mirror's surface. I moved closer. For a second, I thought it might be a hair or a mark that could be wiped away. I touched it. The line remained. I ran my finger over it and felt the roughness. It was a real scratch. The sight frightened me more than the curtain. A moving curtain could be caused by air. A scratch in glass was harder to explain. I looked at my hands. I had not touched the mirror during the ritual. I had only stood in front of it and spun around. The candles had not fallen. Nothing had struck the glass. I checked the objects near the mirror, wondering if something sharp had scraped against it. Nothing seemed close enough. The mark looked fresh, because I was certain I would have noticed it while staring into the mirror only moments earlier. I quickly blew out the candles. The room became completely dark for a second. That second was horrible. I suddenly felt certain something was standing behind me. I reached for the light switch and turned it on. The normal electric light filled the room. The mirror looked ordinary again. My reflection looked like me. The curtain hung motionless over the closed window, but the scratch was still there. I examined it under the brighter light. I hoped it would look less serious. It did not disappear. It was clearly cut into the glass. I do not remember what shape it had. It may have been mostly straight, was slightly curved. It was not a word or symbol, and it did not look like a hand had written something. It was simply a scratch. That should have made it less frightening. Instead, it made the event harder to explain. I began searching the room. I checked behind the curtain again. I looked under furniture and inside the closet. I knew the idea of someone hiding there was ridiculous because the room was small and I had been alone in the house. But fear made me check anyway. No one was there. I walked through the house and checked the doors. They were locked. The windows appeared closed. Nothing had been disturbed. I considered calling my parents. What would I tell them? I performed the Bloody Mary ritual. The curtain moved, and now the mirror is scratched. They might become angry about the candles. They might think I had damaged the mirror and invented a story to avoid punishment. They might leave the funeral or wherever they were and rush home because I had frightened myself. I decided not to call. I turned on more lights. I did not want any room in the house to remain dark. Then, I stayed away from the mirror. For the rest of the night, I tried to distract myself with television and the computer, but I could not stop thinking about the scratch. I kept hearing small sounds in the house. The refrigerator turning on, pipes moving, wood settling. Each noise made me look toward the hallway. I imagined a woman appearing in another mirror. I avoided looking directly into any reflective surface. Even the dark television screen made me uncomfortable because I could see part of the room behind me in it. When my parents eventually came home, I was relieved. I did not immediately tell them everything. I may have mentioned the scratch later or acted as though I had only just noticed it. I do not remember exactly what explanation I gave. The next day, I told my friends at school that I had completed the ritual. I expected them to be impressed. Instead, most of them did not believe me. They said I was lying. Some thought I had been too scared to try and had invented the story afterward. Others laughed about the curtain and scratch. They said the window must have been open, or that the scratch had always been there. I became frustrated because I had performed the ritual partly to prove myself to them. Now, they did not even believe I had attempted it. I tried to describe everything exactly. I told them about the closed window. I told them I had touched the scratch and felt it in the glass. No one took it seriously. As we grew older, the story became something people laughed at whenever I mentioned it. A child performing Bloody Mary at midnight sounds like the beginning of a silly horror movie. People assumed my memory exaggerated what happened. Maybe they were right about parts of it. I was young, frightened, and obsessed with the legend. My mind was prepared to interpret every ordinary event as paranormal. The curtain could have moved because of pressure in the house. Opening or closing a door in another room can sometimes create a draft. A vent might have activated without me noticing. The window could have allowed air through even while locked. Those are all possible explanations. The scratch may have existed before that night. Mirrors collect small marks over time. A child might not notice one until candlelight hits it at the right angle. Perhaps the moving flame caused the scratch to cast a shadow, making it suddenly visible. Maybe I connected two unrelated things because they happened close together. That is probably the most reasonable explanation. I know memory can also change. Each time we tell a story, we may add details without realizing it. The fear becomes clearer while ordinary parts disappear. I have questioned myself many times. Was the scratch truly new? Did the curtain move as strongly as I remember? Was the window definitely closed before the ritual? Did I see the scratch before or only after turning on the light? I cannot prove any of it. There was no video. No one else was in the room. Still, the scratch remained. It is still in the mirror today. My sister has seen it. She is the only person who believes that at least that part of the story is real, because she has looked at the mark herself. Of course, the scratch does not prove Bloody Mary caused it. It only proves there's a scratch in an old mirror. But every time I see it, I remember the exact night when I first noticed it. I remember standing in the candlelight. I remember turning around and seeing only my own reflection. I remember feeling relieved. Then I remember the curtain blowing forward behind me. I remember checking the closed window, and I remember returning to the mirror to find the mark in the glass. For a while afterward, I was afraid to look into mirrors at night. I knew the ritual had no real power, or at least I wanted to believe that. Still, I avoided saying the name near reflective surfaces. If I entered a bathroom in the dark, I turned on the light before looking up. Sometimes I thought I saw movement behind myself in a mirror, but whenever I turned, nothing was there. Those later experiences were clearly caused by nerves and imagination. Nothing else truly unusual happened. No new scratches appeared. No doors opened by themselves. I did not hear voices. I never saw a woman in the glass. The event remained isolated. That should make it easier to dismiss. If something supernatural had really been summoned, why would it move one curtain and scratch one mirror, then never return? That does not make much sense. A simple draft and an old scratch make far more sense. And yet, I still feel uneasy when I think about the timing. Nothing happened during the actual ritual. The mirror remained empty. Only after I decided it was fake did the curtain move. Only when I returned to put out the candles did I see the scratch. It felt almost as though whatever I had called did not appear in the way the story promised. It left just enough evidence to make me question myself forever. That is the part I dislike most. A clear ghost would at least be proof. A completely normal night could be forgotten. Instead, I received something between the two. An event strange enough to frighten me, but ordinary enough for everyone else to dismiss. I no longer believe performing the Bloody Mary ritual summons a demon. Children around the world have probably done it millions of times. Mirrors, spinning, darkness, and candlelight create the perfect conditions for visual tricks. When a person stares into a dim mirror for long enough, the brain can distort faces and shadows. Fear does the rest. The legend survives because people expect something frightening, then interpret every movement as proof. I understand all of that now. But understanding how these stories work does not change what I remember. I was not staring into the mirror when the curtain moved. I had already completed the ritual. I was standing there, feeling almost proud of myself for proving the legend wrong. Then, something behind me moved hard enough to get my attention. The window was closed. The scratch was there. Maybe there is an ordinary explanation I never found. There probably is. Perhaps the curtain was caught by warm air rising from the candles. Maybe the scratch became visible because I changed my position. Those explanations help during the day. At night, they feel less convincing. I sometimes imagine the room as it looked from somewhere else. A child stands alone before a mirror at midnight. 2 candles burn on either side of the glass. The child says a dead woman's name 3 times, turns around, and sees nothing. Then, while the child relaxes, the curtain behind them moves. Perhaps there was never anything supernatural in the room. Perhaps the real danger was only a frightened child using open flames while home alone. That is likely the truth. Still, I never performed the ritual again. I never wanted to test it a second time. My obsession with Bloody Mary ended almost immediately. The online stories stopped being entertaining. When my friends suggested trying it together, I refused. I did not care whether they called me scared. I had already done it once. Once was enough. Years have passed, and I have experienced nothing else that I would call paranormal. I do not see ghosts. I do not hear voices. I do not believe a demon lives in the mirror. My life has been normal. The mirror is only an object. The scratch is only damage to the glass. That is what I believe. But sometimes belief and fear exist at the same time. I can know that Bloody Mary is an urban legend and still feel uncomfortable standing in front of a dark mirror. I can understand drafts and reflections while still remembering that the window was closed. I can accept that the scratch probably existed earlier while still feeling certain it was not there before I turned around. No one has to believe me. I cannot prove the event happened exactly as I remember it. I was a child, and children can frighten themselves easily. Maybe that is the entire explanation. My sister has seen the scratch, but even she did not see it appear. Only I was in the room that night. Only I watched the curtain move. Only I stood in front of the mirror after saying the name 3 times. That is why the story has never had a satisfying ending. There was no investigation, no photograph from before the ritual to compare with the mirror afterward, no witness to confirm the window was closed, only a memory and a mark that remains in the glass. Most days, I do not think about it. Then, someone mentions Bloody Mary, childhood rituals, or strange things seen in mirrors. And I am back in that room. I see the candlelight moving over my face. I hear myself say the name for the 3rd time. I turn and find nothing behind me. For a few seconds, I feel safe. Then the curtain moves. And when I return to the mirror, the scratch is waiting for me. When I was a little girl, I lived through many things that a child should never have had to experience. At the time, though, none of it seemed as unusual as it does now. My mother was an alcoholic, and the instability that came with her drinking was simply part of everyday life. I did not have another childhood to compare it to. Strange adults came and went. Arguments could start without warning. Sometimes the house felt calm, and then, suddenly, everything would change. I learned to pay attention to voices, footsteps, doors closing, and the moods of the people around me. It was not until my late teens that I began to understand how unsafe many parts of my childhood had been. By then, I could look back and recognize things that 9-year-old me had only felt in her stomach. One of the worst situations began when my mother allowed a man to move into our house to help pay rent. I will call him Jay. I do not remember exactly how my mother met him or what explanation she gave for letting him stay. We needed money, and he could contribute toward the bills. That was enough for her. From the beginning, I did not like him. I could not explain why. He had not openly threatened me, and as a child, I did not yet have the words to describe predatory behavior. I only knew that something about him made me uncomfortable. He watched me too closely. Sometimes I would be changing clothes in my bedroom with the door shut, and I would notice it opening slightly. Jay would be standing in the gap, looking inside. Whenever I caught him, he would push the door open farther and pretend he had only come to tell me something. He would act casual, as though he had accidentally opened the door at the wrong moment. But it happened more than once. Even as a child, I knew accidents did not repeat themselves that way. I began changing as quickly as possible. Sometimes I would stand behind the door or press something against it. I listened for footsteps in the hallway. I avoided being alone with him. If he entered a room, I found a reason to leave. His bedroom was near mine, at the opposite end of the house from my mother's room. Before he moved in, I had slept alone without much fear. Afterward, I began sleeping in my mother's bedroom. I did not tell her the full reason. Maybe part of me believed she would not listen. Maybe I did not know how to explain what he had done. I only knew I did not want to sleep in a room beside his while my mother was far away at the other end of the house. Something was also happening between Jay and my mother. I assumed it was sexual, although they never spoke openly about it around me. Their relationship felt secretive and tense. Sometimes they acted friendly. Other times, my mother seemed nervous or angry around him. I once overheard one of my mother's friends warning her about Jay. The woman sounded serious. My mother replied, "Don't worry, I can handle Jay." That sentence did not make me feel safer. It made me more afraid. If there was nothing dangerous about him, why would anyone need to warn her? And why did my mother believe he needed to be handled? I began watching him even more carefully. Then, one day, everything became violent. I was in my bedroom when I heard raised voices. At first, I stayed where I was. Loud arguments were not completely unusual in our house, and I had learned that walking into the middle of one could make things worse. Then, I heard banging. Something heavy hit the floor. Furniture scraped and toppled. The sounds were different from an ordinary argument. I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The house looked as if a fight had moved through it. Furniture had been knocked over. Objects were out of place. The room felt chaotic. My mother was in the kitchen. She was crying and holding a towel around one hand. I thought she had cut herself. The towel covered most of her hand, but her face frightened me more than the injury. She looked pale and terrified. Jay was nearby. When he saw me, he immediately moved in my direction. I stopped. He approached calmly, as though nothing serious had happened. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's all right," he said. "Your mom just needs to be more careful around knives." I looked at my mother. She did not agree with him. She did not explain. She only stared at Jay's face. The expression in her eyes told me that his story was not true. At 9 years old, I did not fully understand what I was seeing. I thought maybe they had been arguing while cooking, and she had accidentally grabbed a knife. But the overturned furniture did not fit that explanation. Neither did the fear on my mother's face. Jay kept his hand on my shoulder. "You don't want to see this," he said. "Let's go for a ride on my motorcycle while your mom gets cleaned up." That suggestion made no sense. I had never gone anywhere alone with him. I barely spoke to him. He was not someone I considered family, a trusted adult, or even a friend. He was only the disturbing man renting a room in our house. I also knew my mother hated his motorcycle. She had called motorcycles death traps more than once. We lived around dirt roads, and she complained that riding one there was dangerous, impractical, and guaranteed to cover a person in dust and mud. She would never normally have allowed me to ride on one, not even with someone she trusted, certainly not with Jay. I waited for her to stop him. She said nothing. That confused me more than anything else. If she did not want me to go, why was she staying silent? I did not understand that she was afraid for both of us. Jay began guiding me toward the door. His hand was firm on my shoulder. It was not a gentle suggestion. He was moving me where he wanted me to go. I tried to look back at my mother. She remained in the kitchen, clutching the towel. I wanted her to say my name. I wanted her to tell him I was staying home. She did not. Jay marched me outside. His motorcycle was waiting. He lifted or pushed me onto it and placed me in front of him. I told him I did not want to go. He told me not to argue. "Be a good girl," he said. I hated those words. They made it sound as if refusing him would make me badly behaved. I was frightened, but I still searched the windows of our house for my mother. I expected her to appear. I imagined her throwing open the door and ordering him to bring me back. No one came outside. Jay climbed onto the motorcycle behind me. The engine started, then we sped away down the dirt road. At first, I was terrified by the motorcycle itself. I had never ridden one like that before. The engine vibrated beneath me, and the dirt road made the entire bike shake. I held on tightly. Dust lifted behind us. The houses of the neighborhood passed by, and my home disappeared from view. The area where we lived was shaped almost like a peninsula, surrounded by a river. There were only two main ways out toward the highway. One route was the normal exit. That road eventually became paved and curved past large horse farms before reaching the highway. Most people used it because it was smoother and faster. The second route was a rough dirt road. It had steep hills and deep muddy dips. Some of the rises were taller than a man, and at the bottom of each one were boggy areas that could be difficult to cross. My mother hated driving that way in her small red car. She would have to slow down, choose the safest side of each muddy section, and carefully weave through. Most people avoided that road unless they had a reason to use it. Jay initially drove toward the normal exit. We approached the Y-shaped split, where one road continued toward the paved route and the other turned onto the rough back way. By then, the motorcycle ride had begun to affect my fear in a strange way. I was still uncomfortable, but I was also 9 years old, riding fast on a motorcycle for the first time. Part of me was fascinated by the speed. That small amount of excitement made the situation feel less urgent than it really was. I did not understand that Jay was trying to escape. I thought maybe he really was only taking me for a ride. Still, something felt wrong. We had already traveled farther than necessary. There were plenty of small back roads inside the neighborhood where he could have circled around and brought me home. That was what my mother sometimes did when she let me sit in her lap and steer the car slowly. There was no reason to take me all the way toward the highway. At the Y-shaped split, Jay stopped the motorcycle. Then he turned off the engine. I assumed it had stalled. The sudden silence felt strange after the loud vibration of the ride. That was when I heard the sirens. They were distant, but clear. Police vehicles were somewhere behind us. At 9 years old, I did not understand what Jay was doing. Years later, I realized he had stopped the motorcycle to listen. He wanted to know whether the police were coming after him. When he heard the sirens, he did not take the paved road. He started the engine again and turned onto the rough dirt route. The motorcycle dropped into the first steep dip. My stomach seemed to rise into my throat. I held onto the bike as hard as I could. There was no seatbelt, no door, and nothing to stop me from being thrown forward. Every hill felt like the motorcycle might launch into the air. Jay drove faster than anyone should have on that road. The tires slid slightly in the loose dirt and mud. Each time we reached the top of a hill, I could not see what was on the other side until we were already going down. I stopped thinking of the ride as exciting. I was afraid I would fall off. I was afraid the bike would tip over. I was afraid Jay would lose control and we would crash into a tree or land in one of the bogs. The sirens faded and returned depending on the hills. We were getting close to the highway when a truck suddenly appeared ahead of us. It was coming from the opposite direction. The truck was moving far too quickly for that road. Almost no one drove fast there because of the deep dips, mud, and uneven ground. Then, the truck moved toward the center. For 1 second, I thought it was aiming directly at us. Jay slammed on the brakes. The motorcycle skidded sideways in the soft dirt. It almost fell. My body jerked forward, and I struck my chin against part of the bike. I bit my tongue. Pain filled my mouth. I began to cry, but I did not scream. I was too shocked. The motorcycle stopped at an angle. The truck stopped in front of us. The driver's door opened. A man climbed out. It was Chad, one of my mother's former boyfriends. Of all the men my mother had dated, Chad had always been my favorite. He reminded me of Steve Irwin, both in appearance and personality. He was large, gentle, funny, and kind. He had always treated me like a person instead of an inconvenience. Seeing him step out of the truck made me feel immediate relief. He smiled when he saw me, and gave a small wave. Then he looked at Jay. His expression changed. I had never seen Chad look that serious before. "Hey, Courtney," he said, keeping his eyes on Jay. "Climb on down and come here." Before I could move, Jay wrapped one arm around me. He pulled me backward against his body. I thought maybe he was nervous because Chad had blocked the road. I tried to reassure him. "It's okay," I said. "That's Chad. He's my friend." I did not understand that Jay already knew exactly who Chad was. Then I noticed Jay was sweating. His entire body was shaking. The trembling traveled through him and into me where he held me. He felt like a person on the edge of exploding. Chad remained calm. "You should let her come back with me," he told him. "You know she shouldn't go with you." The sirens grew louder again. Jay tightened his arm around me for another second. Then he slowly relaxed. I slipped beneath his arm and climbed down into the dirt. The moment my feet touched the ground, I ran. I went straight toward Chad. He lifted me into his arms and placed me inside the truck through the driver's side. I felt safe the second I was in that familiar vehicle. The truck smelled familiar. Chad was familiar. I was no longer alone with Jay. Jay started the motorcycle again. He revved the engine and sped around the truck, continuing down the road toward the highway. Chad climbed into the driver's seat. He moved forward slowly until he found a wider place where he could turn or wait without blocking the road. A few seconds later, 2 police cars came racing toward us. Chad leaned out and waved for them to stop. The first officer slowed. "He went that way," Chad said, pointing down the road. "But the little girl is with me." I waved so the officer could see me. "Go straight back to the house," the officer told Chad. "We're going after him." The police cars sped away. Chad turned the truck around and drove me home. When we arrived, the scene outside our house was completely different from when I had left. Police cars were parked nearby. An ambulance was there. Several neighbors stood outside, some in the road and others in our yard. My mother was sitting on the porch steps. Her hand was wrapped in a large bandage. The moment she saw me in Chad's truck, she began sobbing. Chad helped me out and walked me toward her. She pulled me close. At the time, I still did not understand why everyone seemed so frightened. I knew something bad had happened, but I did not yet realize how close I had come to disappearing. The paramedics wanted my mother to go to the hospital because her hand needed stitches. Chad offered to stay with me and make dinner. Then our neighbor Penny stepped forward. Her daughter was my best friend. Penny said I could spend the night at their house and that she would make sure I got to school the next morning. So that was what happened. After a terrifying afternoon, the rest of the day became strangely normal. I went to my friend's house. I ate dinner. I slept there. The next morning, I went to school. Children can move from disaster back into routine because adults tell them what comes next. I did not understand enough to ask the right questions. I knew my mother had hurt her hand. I knew Jay had taken me on the motorcycle. I knew Chad had blocked us on the back road. But no one explained the entire truth to me. For years, the story existed in incomplete pieces. I remembered my mother crying in the kitchen. I remembered Jay's hand on my shoulder. I remembered the motorcycle and the sirens. I remembered Jay holding me when Chad asked me to come to him. I did not know why my mother had not stopped Jay from taking me. Part of me may even have felt hurt by her silence. Only many years later, when I was in my 20s and my mother had become sober, did she tell me what had really happened. Jay had tried to force himself on her. She resisted. He pulled out a knife. During the struggle, she managed to put her hand between the blade and her throat. That was how her hand had been cut. The fight knocked over the furniture. That was the banging I heard from my bedroom. When I came out, Jay walked toward me and placed his hand on my shoulder. What I had not seen was the knife in his other hand. He positioned it where my mother could see it, but I could not. He used me as a threat. While telling me that my mother needed to be more careful around knives, he was silently warning her not to interfere. When he led me out of the house, he kept me in front of him. One hand remained on me. The other held the knife. He placed a finger to his lips, making a shushing motion toward my mother. That was why she did not shout. That was why she did not run after us. She believed he would stab me. Suddenly, the entire memory changed. My mother had not allowed me to leave because she did not care. She had remained silent because Jay was holding a knife and using me to control her. He was not taking me for an innocent motorcycle ride. He was kidnapping me. He had just tried to assault my mother. He had already shown sexual interest in me by watching me change. He was fleeing from police with a 9-year-old child. When he stopped the bike at the split, he was listening for the sirens. When he chose the terrible back road, he was trying to avoid being caught. I still do not know what he planned to do if he reached the highway. Maybe he intended to use me as protection. Maybe he thought having a child with him would make the police hesitate. Maybe he planned to disappear and take me somewhere else. Considering the way he had watched me before, I cannot avoid thinking about darker possibilities. Learning the truth as an adult made me feel sick. I remembered how I had tried to reassure him when Chad appeared. It's okay. That's Chad. He's my friend. I had spoken kindly to the man kidnapping me because I believed he was the one who needed comfort. I remembered the way he pulled me against him. At the time, I thought it was an awkward hug. Now I understand he was holding on to his hostage. Chad had somehow learned what was happening and guessed which route Jay might use. He chose the rough back road and drove fast enough to reach us before we reached the highway. Then, he used his truck to block the path. If he had been a few minutes later, Jay might have reached the main road. Once there, he could have traveled in several directions. The police might still have caught him, but there would have been more traffic, more speed, and more chances for something to go wrong. Jay could have crashed the bike. He could have used me to threaten the officers. He could have taken me somewhere hidden. Instead, Chad placed his truck in front of us and refused to move. He stayed calm, even though Jay was shaking and dangerous. He did not shout or rush toward us. He simply told me to come to him. That calmness may have saved my life. If Chad had acted aggressively, Jay might have panicked. He could have tightened his grip, pulled the knife, or sped around the truck before I escaped. Instead, Chad spoke as though the only reasonable ending was for Jay to release me. For a few seconds, Jay listened. That was enough. I slipped away. I have thought many times about the chain of events that had to happen perfectly. My mother had to survive the knife. Someone had to call the police. Chad had to learn what happened. He had to realize Jay had taken me on the motorcycle. He had to guess which road Jay would choose. He had to reach the back route before us. He had to block the road without causing a crash. Then, Jay had to release me instead of doing something worse. Any one of those details could have changed. If Chad had stayed home, I might have disappeared. If he had taken the main paved road looking for us, he would have missed us. If his truck had arrived a minute later, Jay might have reached the highway. If the motorcycle had fallen when he slammed the brakes, I could have been seriously injured. I survived because several people acted quickly, and because luck placed Chad directly in our path. When I look back at my childhood, there are several situations where I wonder how I made it through. There were adults around me who should never have been trusted. There were moments when my mother's addiction prevented her from protecting me the way she should have. There were dangers I did not even recognize until years later. Sometimes it feels as though a guardian angel must have been following me. I do not know whether I mean that literally. Maybe the guardian angel was simply every person who noticed something was wrong and chose to act. That day, it was Chad. It was the neighbors who came outside. It was whoever called the police. It was the officers who chased Jay. It was Penny, who gave me a normal and safe place to spend the night while my mother received treatment. As a child, I returned to ordinary life quickly because I did not understand what had happened. As an adult, I understand too well. I had been taken from my home by a violent man who had a knife. He had already tried to assault my mother. He had watched me changing. He forced me onto a motorcycle and fled toward the highway. He only released me because another man blocked the road and the police were closing in. That is difficult to accept as part of my own childhood. For years, I remembered it as the strange day Jay took me on a dangerous motorcycle ride. Now I know it was an attempted kidnapping. I know my mother's frightened silence was not permission. I know Jay's calm voice in the kitchen was a lie. I know the hand on my shoulder was not comforting. It was control. He told me everything was all right while hiding a knife from my view. That may be the part that frightens me most. Danger does not always announce itself with shouting. Sometimes it places a hand on a child's shoulder and speaks gently. Sometimes it says, "Be a good girl." Sometimes it tells everyone that an injured woman was only careless around knives. I trusted my instincts enough to avoid Jay whenever I could, but I was still only a child. I could not remove him from the house. I could not understand the relationship between him and my mother. I could not protect myself from an adult who decided to take me. That responsibility should never have belonged to me. Children deserve adults who listen when they say someone feels unsafe. They deserve doors that remain closed while they change. They deserve homes where dangerous people are not invited to stay because rent is due. They deserve protection even when the danger is inconvenient to acknowledge. I did not always receive that protection. Still, I survived. I escaped Jay before he reached the highway. My mother survived the attack. She eventually became sober and told me the truth. Chad appeared on that back road exactly when I needed him. When I think about him stepping out of the truck, I still remember the relief I felt before I even understood why I needed saving. He smiled at me first. Then he looked at Jay with a seriousness I had never seen. "Hey, Courtney," he said, "climb on down and come here." Those simple words gave me a safe direction to run. I often wonder whether Jay would have let me go if the sirens had not been approaching. I do not think he would have. His body was shaking. He was desperate. He had already chosen the difficult road to escape the police. He held on to me until the last possible moment. Only when Chad blocked him and the sirens grew louder did he release his arm. That is how close it was. One arm around a child. A motorcycle pointed toward the highway. A truck blocking the road. Police sirens getting closer. Then a small opening. I slipped beneath his arm and ran. My life continued because I reached Chad's truck. If I had not, everything after that day might have been different. I might not have returned to school the next morning. I might not have grown into the person who could finally understand the memory. I might not be here to tell the story. Of all the frightening experiences from my early life, this one remains the worst. Not only because of what happened, but because of what almost happened. I almost disappeared with a violent man who had already shown an interest in me that no adult should ever show toward a child. I almost reached the highway with him. I almost became another missing girl whose family could only guess what happened. Instead, a familiar truck came flying down the worst road in the neighborhood. It moved into the center and forced the motorcycle to stop. The driver stepped out, and for the first time that day, I saw an adult who was truly there to protect me. This was not even close to the most frightening or traumatic thing that has ever happened to me, but it is one of the easier stories to tell. Even so, it affected me more than I expected, mostly because of how close I came to making one quick decision that could have changed my life forever. I work in retail, and most of my shifts are spent on the sales floor. It is the kind of job where you are constantly moving, answering questions, straightening shelves, helping customers find items, and trying to notice anything that looks unusual. After a while, you become used to all kinds of people. Some customers are friendly. Some barely acknowledge you. Others are rude, impatient, or behave as if everyone working in the store exists only to get out of their way. Because of that, when someone acts strange, it does not always seem important at first. About a month ago, I was working in one of the areas closest to the store entrance. From where I stood, I could see part of the main walkway leading from the front doors toward the back of the building. It was an ordinary shift. Customers were walking around with shopping carts and baskets. Employees were moving between departments. The usual store announcements played through the speakers, and conversations mixed with the sounds of carts rolling across the floor. I was focused on my work when a man entered my area. I noticed him immediately because of the way he moved. He had a completely cold expression on his face. He looked like someone who had never smiled in his life. There was no curiosity in his eyes, and no sign that he was casually shopping. He walked quickly and aggressively, almost as if he were angry at everything around him. He came so close to me that he nearly knocked me over. He did not apologize. He did not slow down or even look in my direction. He simply continued toward the back of the store. For a moment, I watched him go. Something about him felt wrong, but not wrong enough to make me call security or follow him. Retail workers meet rude people every day. Some customers are in a hurry. Some are angry before they even enter the building. Some push past employees without noticing them. I decided he was just another rude man who believed everyone else should move out of his way. I went back to work. About 10 minutes passed. By then, I had mostly forgotten about him. Then, someone suddenly came over the walkie-talkie. The voice was loud, urgent, and much more panicked than the normal communication we heard during a shift. A man had stolen an expensive item. He was running toward the front of the store. Employees were warned to watch out. Because I was standing close to the main walkway leading toward the exit, I looked toward the back. I saw the man almost immediately. It was the same person who had nearly walked over me earlier. He was running directly toward the front doors. He was not moving especially fast. He looked awkward while running, and he clearly was not expecting anyone in my position to interfere. He had probably chosen the most direct route from the back of the store to the exit. That route brought him straight toward me. Everything happened in only a few seconds. I had almost no time to think. I knew he had stolen something expensive. I knew security was trying to stop him. I knew he was about to pass close enough for me to reach him. My first impulse was to trip him. It felt almost automatic. I imagined sticking out a foot, knocking him off balance, and giving security enough time to catch him. Then I thought about pushing him. He was not very fast, and he did not seem prepared for anyone to touch him. I believed it would be easy. He was running directly into my reach. For one moment, I felt as though I had the perfect opportunity to stop him. I started to move. My body reacted before I had fully made the decision. I shifted my weight and began raising an arm, preparing to reach out as he passed. There was no time to ask a manager what to do. There was no time to consider company policy. There was only the man running toward me and the strong instinct to stop him. Then a single thought entered my mind. What if he has a weapon? It came at the last possible second. I stopped moving. I pulled back and let him pass. He ran so close that I could have touched him without taking a full step. For a brief moment, I felt guilty. I wondered if I had been a coward. Maybe I had allowed a thief to escape because I was afraid. Maybe I should have done something. Those thoughts lasted only a few seconds. The man continued running toward the front doors. 2 security guards moved in to stop him. They were larger and stronger than I was. They were trained to deal with theft and dangerous people, or at least had more experience with those situations than an ordinary employee. They tackled him to the ground. At first, it looked like the whole incident was over. The man had been caught. Then, everything became violent. He had a knife. It was already out and ready in his hand. I had not seen it while he was running toward me. From my angle, his body or clothing must have hidden it. Maybe he was holding it close to his side. Whatever the reason, the knife had been there the entire time. As the guards struggled with him, he began stabbing them. The scene changed so quickly that my mind struggled to understand what I was seeing. A moment earlier, it had looked like a normal shoplifting incident. Then there was shouting, movement, and blood. The man stabbed the guards in their chests and arms. People nearby screamed and moved away. Employees shouted through the radios. Someone called emergency services. The guards continued trying to control him, even though they had been injured. I stood there, watching the entire thing happen. I felt completely helpless. Part of me wanted to move closer and help. Another part of me understood that getting near him would only create another victim. The knife moved quickly. It was not large enough to be obvious from a distance, but it was more than capable of killing someone. The man used it without hesitation. That was what frightened me most. He did not only carry a weapon for show. When someone tried to stop him, he immediately used it. There was no warning, no threat, no pause where he gave the guards a chance to move away. He stabbed them because they were between him and the exit. Eventually, the man was brought under control. The exact details after that are less clear because everything became chaotic. Managers appeared. Police and paramedics were called. Customers were moved away from the area. The injured guards needed immediate medical attention. Both guards survived, thank God. That was the most important thing. Their injuries were serious, but they lived. For everyone else, that should have made the story feel like it had a good ending. The thief was stopped. The stolen item was recovered, or at least no longer mattered. The guards survived. No innocent customer was killed. But my mind kept returning to the few seconds before the attack. I remembered the man running toward me. I remembered beginning to reach out. I remembered stopping only because one small question entered my head. What if he has a weapon? He did. The knife had been right there, hidden from me. If I had extended my arm, he would have felt me touch or push him. If I had tripped him, he might have fallen directly beside me. If I had managed to knock him down, I would have been the closest person when he got up. He had stabbed 2 large security guards who tackled him together. I was not a security guard. I am not especially strong. I had no protective equipment, no training, and no reason to believe I could control an armed man. If I had tried to stop him, he could have turned the knife on me. There is a good chance he would have. The thought has remained with me ever since. Sometimes I imagine the version where I did not stop myself. I stick out my foot. He falls. I move closer, believing I have helped. Then he rolls over with a knife in his hand. Maybe he stabs me in the stomach or chest before I even understand what is happening. Maybe he slashes my arm or face. Maybe he grabs me and uses me to get past security. Maybe I fall and hit my head. There are many possible endings, and almost all of them are worse than what actually happened. The real version ended with me standing safely to the side while he ran past. That should feel like relief. Instead, I sometimes feel ashamed. I know that does not make complete sense. I made the correct decision. Employees are not supposed to risk their lives for store property. An expensive item can be replaced. A human life cannot. Still, part of me feels pathetic for being so shaken when I was not the person stabbed. The guards were the ones who suffered physically. They went to the hospital. They had wounds in their chests and arms. They were the ones who had to heal. I only watched. But witnessing violence affects people too. I did not understand that immediately. At first, I told myself I had no right to feel upset. I was alive. I was uninjured. I had gone home after the shift. Compared to what happened to the guards, my experience seemed small. Then I began noticing how often I replayed it. Whenever someone moved quickly through the store, I became alert. If a customer kept one hand hidden in a pocket or beneath a jacket, I watched them more closely. Whenever a message came over the walkie-talkie in an urgent voice, my body tensed before I understood the words. The main walkway near the entrance no longer felt like an ordinary part of the store. I kept seeing the man running toward me. I remembered his expression when he first passed through my area. Stone cold. Aggressive, focused. At the time, I had dismissed him as rude. Now I wondered whether he had already decided he would use the knife if someone tried to stop him. Maybe he had entered the store prepared to stab whoever stood in his way. Perhaps the weapon had been part of the plan from the beginning. That made our first encounter feel different. When he nearly knocked me over on the way to the back, he may already have been armed. I had been inches from a man carrying a knife and willing to use it. I also thought about how easy it had been to miss the weapon. People often imagine they will recognize danger immediately. They think an armed person will hold the weapon where everyone can see it. They believe they will have time to make a careful decision. That is not what happened. I saw a man running awkwardly with stolen property. I did not see the knife. The danger became obvious only after he attacked. If my mind had not produced that one warning thought, I might have acted based on incomplete information. That is what makes split-second situations so dangerous. You only see part of what is happening. You make decisions using whatever your brain can process in 1 or 2 seconds. There is no chance to pause the scene and examine his hands. There is no time to ask whether he has a weapon, whether he is under the influence of something, or whether he is desperate enough to hurt someone. The body wants to act. Sometimes the safest response is to do nothing. That lesson goes against many instincts. People like to imagine themselves as heroes. We picture stopping thieves, defending strangers, and stepping into danger without hesitation. In our imagination, the criminal falls, everyone cheers, and no one gets hurt. Real life is messier. A person can carry a hidden knife. A simple tackle can become a stabbing. A stolen item can become the reason someone dies. I came very close to learning that lesson in the worst possible way. The security guards probably did not expect the knife either. They moved in because stopping thieves was part of their job. They were prepared for a struggle, but maybe not for someone trying to stab them in the chest. They were strong enough to survive and keep fighting. I do not know whether I would have been. A stab to the wrong place can kill someone quickly. Even a wound to the arm can damage nerves, muscles, or arteries. The difference between surviving and dying can be only a few inches. That is why I cannot stop imagining where the knife might have struck me. Maybe that sounds dramatic, because it did not happen. But the possibility was real. The man ran close enough for me to reach him. I had already started moving. The only thing separating the real event from the imagined one was a thought that lasted less than a second. I sometimes wonder where that thought came from. Maybe it was training. Maybe I had heard managers warn employees not to confront shoplifters. Maybe I remembered stories about retail workers being attacked. Or maybe it was only instinct. Whatever it was, I am grateful. That hesitation may have saved my life. After the incident, people talked about what happened. Some praised the guards. Some discussed the thief and the charges he would face. Others talked about store security and whether procedures should change. I did not tell many people how close I had come to reaching out. It felt embarrassing. I worried they would say I was stupid for even considering it. They would have been right. Trying to stop him would have been dangerous and against the safest way to handle theft. But judging a decision afterward is easy. In the moment, the impulse felt natural. Someone had stolen an expensive item. He was running toward me. I had a chance to stop him. My brain almost treated it like a simple problem. Extend a foot. Push him. Help catch the thief. Only at the last second did I remember that people are unpredictable. The fact that I nearly made the wrong decision shook me almost as much as witnessing the stabbing. I like to believe I am careful. I like to think I understand danger. That day showed me how quickly instinct can push a person into a terrible situation. I was not trying to be brave. I was not thinking about becoming a hero. I simply reacted. That is frightening because many life-changing mistakes happen in exactly that way. No plan, no long decision, only one fast movement. Sometimes I feel guilty that the guards were hurt while I stayed safe. That feeling is not logical either. Their injuries were not my fault. I did not force them to tackle the man. I did not know he had a knife. Getting stabbed beside them would not have helped anyone. Still, survivor's guilt does not always listen to logic. I watched two people get injured by someone who had just passed close enough to touch me. I walked away physically unharmed. Part of my mind keeps asking why they suffered, and I did not. The honest answer is luck. I hesitated. They had a job that required them to confront him. The knife happened to strike them instead of me. There is no deeper meaning. That randomness is hard to accept. I have also thought about the man himself. The first time I saw him, his face seemed completely empty. He looked angry but controlled. After the stabbing, I wondered whether that expression had shown exactly what kind of person he was in that moment. Maybe he was frightened and hiding it. Maybe he was under the influence of drugs. Maybe he had committed theft many times before and believed violence was simply another tool. I do not know. What I do know is that he valued escaping with stolen property more than the lives of the people trying to stop him. He was willing to drive a knife into another human being over an item from a store. That is something I struggle to understand. No product is worth a life. No amount of money is worth leaving someone bleeding on the floor. But criminals do not always think in reasonable ways. That is another reason ordinary employees should not try to stop them. You do not know what the person is willing to do. You do not know what they are carrying. You do not know whether they believe they have nothing to lose. Now, when theft happens, I remember that. Let the item go. Call security. Move customers away. Observe from a safe distance, if possible. Do not place your body between a desperate person and the exit. The company can replace merchandise. It can write reports, review cameras, and work with police. It cannot return someone to their family after they die. That idea seems obvious now. In the moment, it was not. I wish I could say the experience made me completely calm and wise. It did not. Sometimes I still feel afraid when someone behaves aggressively in the store. I still study hands and pockets. I still become nervous when a person moves quickly toward the front. I know most customers are harmless. I know most shoplifters only want to escape. But I also know one man carried a hidden knife. Once you have seen a situation turn violent, you understand how little warning there may be. The guards survived, and I am deeply thankful for that. Their survival allows people to tell the story without calling it a tragedy. But it could easily have become one. A blade could have gone deeper. It could have struck the heart, lungs, throat, or a major artery. Help might have arrived too late. I could have been beside them or injured before they even reached him. All of us were only seconds away from a different ending. I am trying not to feel pathetic for being affected. Fear after witnessing an attack does not mean weakness. Being shaken by almost becoming a victim is not the same as pretending I suffered more than the people who were stabbed. Both things can be true. The guards experienced something terrible. And I experienced the realization that I had nearly stepped directly into the path of the same weapon. I did not need to be cut for that knowledge to disturb me. Sometimes the things that almost happen stay with us as strongly as the things that do. There is no wound to point to, no scar, no medical record, only the memory of starting to move and then stopping, only the image of the knife appearing seconds later. I have replayed that moment many times, changing the timing slightly. In one version, the warning thought comes too late. My hand touches his shoulder. He turns. In another, I trip him successfully, and he attacks from the floor. In another, he grabs me before security reaches him. Those events never happened, but my mind creates them because it understands how possible they were. I try to stop the thoughts by focusing on what actually happened. I listen to the warning in my head. I let him run past. The guards stopped him. They were injured, but they survived. I went home. That is the real ending. It was not cowardice. It was caution. I did not fail the store by allowing a thief to pass. I protected myself from a threat I could not see. The item he stole was never worth gambling my life over. I know that now. The next time someone runs toward me, I hope I will remember it immediately rather than needing a final second warning. I will step aside. I will keep my distance. I will not assume that because I cannot see a weapon, there is no weapon. People sometimes imagine courage means moving toward every danger. I think courage can also mean resisting the pressure to act like a hero. It can mean admitting that you do not know what someone is carrying. It can mean choosing to stay alive, even when part of you feels guilty for doing so. I still see the man's expression sometimes. I see him walking aggressively toward the back of the store, nearly knocking me over. Then I see him 10 minutes later running in the opposite direction. I see my arm beginning to move. I hear the thought, what if he has a weapon? Then he passes me. Seconds later, the knife comes out. Every time I remember it, I feel the same cold shock. The weapon had been there all along. I just could not see it.